Okay, great. Morning, everyone. Welcome to the San Ramon Valley Unified School District Board of Election Workshop. We want to let the public know that we are video recording today's workshop. The recording is being live streamed on the district's YouTube channel, and a link to the recording has been posted on its website. As a reminder, per Contra Costa Health Services requirements, masks are required indoors for all persons regardless of vaccination status. I'd like to introduce my board members today. Vice President Ken Mintz, Clerk Rachel Hurd, Board Member Shelley Clark,
Good morning.
Laura Bratt,
Morning.
and our student board member Ronit Batra.
Good morning.
Okay, great. Please join me now in Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, may I agenda.
Second.
The motion was made by Board Member Mintz and seconded by Board Member Hurd. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Batra.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Mintz.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
Great. Thank you. Okay, our board governance workshop. I am so excited for today's job because we get a little bit of time to actually work on ourselves and the way that we can make sure that we are reviewing our information and then also conduct our business most effectively as possible. So to help facilitate today's meeting, I'd like to introduce Carolyn Finders, Director of Communication Legislative Affairs from Fagan, Friedman, and Fulford Frost. That's who will present our board governance workshop today. Carolyn?
Good morning. It's nice to be with all of you. And I also introduced my colleague from our Oakland office, Namita Brown, and she will be assisting. I am the Director of Communications at a law, but I'm not a lawyer. So I'm obligated to bring one with me wherever I go to make sure. Anyway, I was just a moment of levity. Thank you all. So I am a former trustee. I served on a board of education in Southern California in the Las Virgenes district, very similar to the San Ramon district. I got involved in advocacy work at the state, and that's folks from your district, the superintendent at the time and others, as we were advocating at the time, advocating on behalf of children with special needs. And that's where I got really involved at the state and familiar with San Ramon. Now I'm in this position and I facilitate governance workshops up and down the state. I'm delighted to be with you here today. You're a terrific team of people very dedicated to your children and the community you serve. This is your meeting. I did not bring a PowerPoint. I don't stand and deliver. I ask questions and facilitate discussion. If I see you looking at me too much, I'm kind of gesture to look at each other because you are a five-headed boss. And the point of today's discussion is to just really work through the operations, how you work together. You became a team during COVID. Your superintendent joined you bravely during COVID. And we want to have a chance as boards to sit together and work through just the operations. How do we place things on the agenda? What's the process your superintendent prefers for questions being asked in preparation for meetings? Just all the operational stuff where an employee wants to sit with a boss and talk about how are we going to do this. And you really have not been offered that opportunity with 3 hours at your disposal like you have today. So this is to viewing public and a community attending. This is not about setting direction or vision or reviewing policy per se. It's about how you work together. So with that, as a brief introduction, I have a couple questions to launch us, but I want to ask the group, if you please, is your preference that we address each other by I address you as Trustee Hurd, Trustee Mintz, or do you be working through first name? The more casual it is, the more comfortable you're going to be having your conversation, but I defer to your preference, ma'am.
I usually prefer a first name.
Okay, all right, very good. And sir? Okay, very good. All right, so I've in the past not asked the question, and it's embarrassing. So we'll just go with this. Okay, very good. So just briefly, if you with us, how long you've been on the Board of Education, why you ran, and what was your first job? What was your first paying job? And we'll start with your board president.
I can start. So I've been on the board. This is my third year on the board, but I'm not unfamiliar with our, Indian district because I've been both volunteer employee, classified employee of the district, and parent, of course, because my two children had gone through the school district. So let's see, my very first paying job was when I was 16, and I was an usher at a symphony hall. And yeah, and I remember, once, you're not supposed to let people in after a certain amount of time when the symphony starts. And so I'm like, at the door, trying not to let people in until there's a break. And then this older gentleman with a cane. And I think he must have been one of the regulars. And he's like, no, I'm going in. Since he had a cane, I wasn't going to argue with him. So I'm like, there we go. So that was my first.
That's terrific. And we'll turn now to Ken.
Morning. Let's see. I'm in my 17th year on the board. And for those who don't know, it was a breakdown. My first term was 1992 to 96 and came back on 2009 and been on board. Initially, my involvement was because of my kids. I had already been serving on San Ramon's Parks and Community Services Commission, which I joined because we spent time in parks. And as my older one was getting ready to get into school in first grade, I figured that was a way of getting involved. And part of it was my background. My dad back in New Jersey had been on the school board. I had spent many years as a kid attending school.
Oh, really? Where was that?
So that back in New Jersey,
And where?
Fair Lawn, New Jersey.
Oh,
Bergen
Fairlawn.
County.
Yeah, I know exactly where that is.
So I had gone through a lot with him, with teaching associations and other areas. Just, as I like to say, even in my yearbook, senior year of high school, there were a couple of entries of friends who thought I'd be on the school board sometime. So
It was those yearbooks where, most best laugh, best hair, most likely to
Yeah.
be on a school board.
be on the school board someday. As far as first job, first paying job, I was 10 years old and had a newspaper route, which was underage. I had 11 papers that I delivered 6 days a week and had to collect each week, 50 cents. And so I made a total of $1.87 a week because they gave me 17 cents a paper a week. And interesting, kind of like your man with the cane, learned early on dealing with particularly adults, people who would hide behind their curtains, not to open the door to pay me the 50 cents. And having to figure out how to deal with that because if they didn't pay, it came out of my pocket until I can finally get collection because that was part of the job.
That would build some tenacity, yeah, for sure. Thank you.
So I have been on the board almost 15 years. I was elected in 2006. I had been very involved in PTA and just served as council president and then special needs chair, and running for school board was kind of a natural next step. In terms of paying job, I did a lot of babysitting when I was young. I can't remember how early it started, but my first regular job was babysitting for the family across the street every Wednesday night and all day Saturday for probably like a year and a half as both parents worked. And so I had a 9-year-old under my charge and like 18-month-old. And that was a pretty serious time commitment at that age to dedicate for that. So
Yeah, extraordinary. Thank you. And if you don't mind, we'll flip it over here to the board and Laura.
Hi. I am a newly elected trustee. I was elected in, I was sworn in December of 2020. Prior to running, I had been on a foundation as a foundation president and various PTAs, the various districts that we had lived in around the country, but the foundation most recently was in Southern California, Campus Unified. And then we went up to San Ramon in 2015, and I joined the LCAP committee, school site council. I'd been in other school site councils. And then last couple of years, I noticed, we purposefully chose this district. It was, I'd been in enough school districts and I knew what a good school district was. And that's kind of why we chose San Ramon. And I was just noticing that there was some systemic stuff that my kids were kind of hitting against and that I was hitting against as I was rattling the cages for them. And so I had over the years in, being a little bit involved with school boards as a foundation president and LCAP committee and stuff, I just felt like it was something that I would enjoy and that I could add to with my perspectives. And so then when I saw that there was an open seat in my area, and I thought, I'm just gonna get really uncomfortable and do this. And so I did, and here I am still being uncomfortable, but really, really happy that I'm here. And my first job was actually in the 4th grade. My parents owned a quick printing business in a small town in northern Wisconsin, and I made 50 cents an hour collating booklets, programs, stapling, that kind of stuff. And it actually really launched me into, my career has been in graphic design. I majored in art, and it launched me into my career, and I love it. And so, yeah. So.
Terrific. Thank you.
So I, like Laura, as you know, is a newly elected board member. I've been in the district for about 20 years, and I have 2 kids that went through all the schools here. And I was heavily involved in the PTAs and Ed Fund president. I was on 2 or 3 district committees as chair and homework policy committee and many other things. And as Rachel said in her statement about herself, that running for school board just seemed like it was the natural, the next progression. And so I made a decision in 2018 when my son graduated that I would go ahead and do that. And as Laura said, be uncomfortable and put myself out there. So I'm so glad to be here. And basically why I ran was because I felt like I had so much experience at school sites that I wanted to be able to serve the community. So that's basically here. My first job, I grew up in a little town near the coast in Sonoma County called Occidental. And Occidental is known for its 3 big Italian restaurants. And I was counting the minutes until I turned 14 and I could get a work permit so that I could go to work in the restaurants. So I worked as a bus girl until I graduated from high school and earned money and learned a lot of responsibility and how to work hard. So that's my story.
Thank you very much. And we'll turn to the student representative, and welcome to this position. I think it's terrific, and I know trustees love having a student voice added to the discussion. So we're glad you're here.
Definitely. So I'm also very newly elected. I started in, I guess, technically August of this year. So it's just my 2nd month on the job. My first paying job was teaching speech and debate at the high school. This was in my summer from 9th to 10th grade, and then over the as well. And then over this past summer from, not past anymore, over 10th to 11th grade summer, so it has been summer now. But what drew me to the school board was really being able to be involved with my community, especially at the site level and at the student level, and making sure to advocate for my peers and other people within the district, whether they're at the elementary school level or the middle school level or even the high school level, just really making that the student voice is heard.
Thank you. Again, welcome. And John, just a slight shift from why you ran. You didn't run,
No.
but here you are. So maybe you could just share some information and just to contextualize this for everyone here, staff and those who are joining us virtually. Your board hasn't had a chance to do this. You know, they are a team of people. They come with their own points of view. If we wanted everyone to have the same point of view, we'd only need one of you. We're better through divergent thinking, discussion, deliberation. That's how we learn. That's how we grow, arrive at a better place. But we were all thrown into this very quickly, elected in 2020, only 2 months ago, and a superintendent who joined you when the executive orders from the state and the guidelines were moving fast and furious. And so we just want some time to be together and be more relaxed. And agree on our protocols and how we're going to work together moving forward. So I don't know that anyone sitting at this square hollow necessarily needed that, but I want to be respectful of others who are joining us. So thank you for that. And we turn it back to you, John. And I guess the big question is, why are you here and what do you hope to accomplish with this terrific organization that is well regarded for excellent education?
So thanks, Carolyn. And I'm really glad we're here too, because even though we've had opportunities for other workshops, and I'm coming from Toronto, Canada, that our California Ed Code certainly demands a lot of very specific things that I needed to learn. Obviously, many of you have been here for a while, so you would know those things. And we've actually had opportunities to talk about them. But what I appreciate about today is the plan is to have conversation and discussion with all of that, which is required of you and us. So this is the start of my second year here, which I'm through in the San Ramon Valley Unified School District with all of you. This is the start of my 13th year as a superintendent. Actually, now I became assistant superintendent in 2000. So I've been doing either assistant superintendent or superintendent work for quite a while. And I have served a board of 11 first elected officials. And then I served a board of 22 elected officials. And I'm thrilled to be with the 5 of you. And I say that with a little bit of levity, but what I learned from serving 22 really wonderful leaders, I want to say sincerely, is that no matter how small or large the body is, the relationship between myself and our team and you is absolutely significant. As Carolyn said, doesn't need to always agree, but how we work together is so significant and important. And secondly, I believe so strongly that with good process, you don't get up in negative things because we're not sure how to proceed. The third thing is, and this is probably the most important piece, that is why we're going to capture this and ensure that even if our community isn't watching today, just like all public meetings, there will be some highlight out is many of the questions I receive from our community explains that our community doesn't always understand your role, to be frank. And so I'm excited about today for that as well. My first paying job was a lifeguard. I was a big swimmer as a kid. Don't do it so much anymore. I kind of turned to land exercises, but I swam for many, many years and I was a lifeguard and enjoyed that swimming instructor very early in my day and excited about that. And still remember positive memories of wanting to be a teacher because of that swimming instructor role. And one of the reasons, I'll say the biggest reason I wanted to come to the San Ramon Valley Unified School Districts, I had been working in urban centers for most of my career. I was an assistant superintendent in a district like ours. And after learning a ton and enjoying and appreciating the service in the big urban districts, I was looking for something different. I wanted to actually get to know the community again. I had 600 schools in my previous role. I was a figurehead. People only knew me through the video. And unfortunately, that's kind of the way it has been last year, but I tend to rectify that as things get better with the pandemic. So I'm here because I want to continue to lead. I want to continue to lead in a district that wants to do better, even though we do well. And I wanted to do it in a way that I could actually know people again. When I walked into a school, staff knows who I am. I get to know I actually know all the principals now. I had 6 principals. I didn't know all their names. So anyway, those are some of the things that drew me here, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It does, there are 1,000+ districts in the state of California, you know that, the largest being LAUSD. There was a time, I'm not sure if this is still accurate, that I was told that if you added all the charter schools together, that would have been the second largest if you looked at them as a district. We don't, but operationally they are a demand on the state. And then all the way through to districts that are a single school. I've been in governance retreats with boards governing over a single school district. And so they're all different sizes up and down the state. And I will say, just sort of to echo your sentiment, John, it's nice when you can get your arms around an organization, when you really feel it and when you know it. And so it does feel comfortable. So, well, thank you. So today we're going to move through a draft handbook that was created by a district here in the state. And we're going to guide our discussion around the norms by which you guys agree to work, how we put things on the agenda, how we would ask staff for information prior to an agenda, committee appointments, what is our work with regard to community engagement, our use of social media there. I have Namita here because there are some laws that should strictly guide the way we work with, conduct some of this work. So she'll be here to, it's like I borrow from John's experience as a swimmer. There are lane lines, that's the law. And then there's a space in between the lane lines where you're perfectly comfortable to set your protocols for how you're going to work. But those lane lines exist. And I also draw from a comment you made. I don't think the public necessarily always understands that. And I think that the public necessarily understands that the board is legally the body that has authority. Individual board members have no authority. You have a lot of responsibility, but only the board has authority, and you give direction through the majority of the board, and you're only a board when you're in a meeting. A publicly noticed, properly noticed meeting. And so that is why we have so many protocols for how we conduct our meetings, because you need to get to the business of, and sometimes the public misunderstands and they want to know, why are you not engaging with us when we're there? Why are you not giving us more time when we're in your meetings? You absolutely have to conduct in these meetings, and that's your obligation. There are other strategies we can put in place for hearing from the public more than just at our regularly scheduled meetings. And also, while I'm on that topic, just a point of clarification that I think is important to make for the group to be able to articulate broadly, and also for your public to hear. A frequently asked question, when I come to the board meeting, I've hired a babysitter, I got through the homework, fed the kids a grilled cheese, got a babysitter to my house, got over to your board meeting, addressed you, and you didn't say anything about the subject of interest to me. If it isn't on your agenda, you can't talk about it. The agenda is what informs the public, what you will be discussing, and so it's a democracy tool. It informs your public. So that's a point of clarification, not for this board, certainly not for 17 and 15-year veterans on the board, but for the public who's watching us. So from the outset, I just want to ask you to take a look at this sample governance handbook. Many districts have these. We're going to create one here in the district. Your board president is going to ask for an ad hoc group to pull out at the conclusion of this conversation, 2 of you. And I would just suggest probably a good idea for a veteran and a newer member of the board to partner together on this work, but that's up to you, to pin down specifically your protocols for moving forward, which will come today. So our Cindy Fisher is going to take copious notes over there that you can draw from when you come back in committee. And the purpose of this, while you are high functioning, and to my observation of your meetings, you work very well together. You are very, I believe, aware of the fund governance versus, say, management. It's good to memorialize this because it is, you know, what you would hand. It is really a legacy. It is what you would hand to the next board. It is their privilege to meet and review it and agree to it, but it at least sets a groundwork. So we're going to start with that. And from at this point, I just ask the trustees: do you have any specific items that you want to make sure I make a note of? Desired outcomes, questions about operations that you want me to just make here, so I make sure before you're out of time that we touch on those. Yes.
I know there's some in here, and we already have some protocols related to emails to the board, but I would like for us to be able to parse that a little more clearly, because sometimes we all receive the same email, but it comes individually, and I think maybe discussing some kind, maybe not working out the details of it, but some kind of process where we're logging things so we know that.
Okay, very good.
And it isn't always just, hey, did you receive this? Because that in
Yeah.
busy times becomes even more onerous.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, noted. Thank you. Anything else, including your, Dr. Moore?
Yeah, my list. The precedent for who becomes president, vice president, and secretary, how that works, you know, I just don't know as a new trustee. And then a response to both email and email public comment. The idea of having a new trustee onboarding, which you kind of discussed, but that was something I know Shelley and I, when we first came on, that, you know, we had no idea about anything, and had actually sent Cindy a long list and felt really bad about that. So having, you know, other trustees that I know at other districts were given a binder, you know, so that kind of idea. And then meeting management, how to be able to have, I guess what it is to kind of have a line in terms of respect for the community that comes, and also a line for the community's respect towards us, like where we draw that line. I don't know how that looks, but.
Thank you. Anything else?
I had one. How to add an agenda item.
Well, you picked all the high flyers.
Carolyn,
Yeah.
I
Sir.
think I mentioned this to you, but one of the things I've shared with trustees is how, when we're already set in the year, that members of the board might participate in various committees, which committees are appropriate, which committees might not be, if there isn't, what's the process for that? I know our process once a year, but what I have is that when we're past that once a year, people will call and ask, and I find the first question I have is, well, how do I provide access to everybody? Do I do this at a meeting? Can it be informal? Is it even appropriate for that particular meeting to have trustee representation? That whole conversation, I think, would be great.
Terrific. Great.
And can we add to that between sort of like standing committees
Mhm.
and
The varied
Right.
types of committee. 'cause
And
there
I
are-
was going to add to that, superintendent committee versus board committee.
Correct. Yeah, and this is why I brought attorney, because she's
Right,
very
there's
versed
different
in this.
law
So
rules.
I have another thought too. How, now that this is really the first election cycle, we're by area,
mhm.
so how we navigate as being elected in one area but representing the entire district, and how that looks as a governing body and also as an individual board member.
Okay. Good questions.
And then one more, I
Yeah.
think, I've heard, and from our last meeting, the regular meeting, I think touch on resolutions too.
Okay.
We want to touch on that.
Okay. Very good. So we're going to dive in. And again, this is your meeting. So I'm going to just start at the top with a sample of the posted, so it is available to your community. I want to stress, this is not language that is recommended for San Ramon. These are not protocols that are recommended for you. This is taken from another group that sat just as you are, and this is what they agree fits for them. But it's just a guide. We thought it's better than starting with a blank page per se. So on the page of governance norms, I would just say there's really not much need, in my opinion, to discuss this here other than to have your ad hoc committee review this and make sure it is reflective of your values, which have been stated in your strategic directions and in many of the conversations you've had as an organization. But that's something you want to make sure that reading language you've spoken about and that you own. And you've had many, many deep discussions about equity and all students and quiet and silent and softer voices. I believe that was how it was described, and making sure that you're accessible to your community. So you'll want to make sure whoever's on the committee, Cindy, is very attentive to this page apropos of your current value propositions.
Can I make one comment on
Sure,
the first one?
sure.
I think in our strategic directions conversations, and then I was also just part of a CSBA policy platform committee,
Mhm.
and they were aligned with our language about every student instead of all students, just the focus on the individual as opposed to if
Yeah.
that can be thrown.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a matter of process clarification, the ad hoc committee will take the discussion from today and pin down your handbook, but bring it back to the full board. So you'll all be reviewing it, and you could see it just in advance of the meeting, as you do, and be able to bring your comments in. And I also want to say that this is for the entire governance team, and that includes you, sir. So you want to be very comfortable with this. So let's just start with setting the agenda. And this question I like to begin with, are you clear on the process by which you can ask for an agenda? Well, you see two categories here, setting the agenda and placing items on the agenda. Perhaps we could begin with placing items on the agenda. What is the process? Are you comfortable with it? And maybe I'll turn to a veteran and
Well,
maybe it would
most of what appears on our agenda is set by staff. As opposed to other agencies that are more legislative in process, where individuals bring a lot more items to the agenda. It seems we do occasionally, but not very often. And so I think because of that, it's each time a little different, based upon who brings it forward and how does it get onto the agenda. I think one of the key elements, though, is this question of when it gets on the agenda, in addition to if. Because there seems to be some expectation that, well, you want something on the agenda, it should be on the very next agenda, which doesn't allow staff time to research and determine first if it's an appropriate item, and if it's considered appropriate, what kind of staff time needs to go in and what priority placed on it as well.
Okay.
So there's a whole bunch of issues associated with the when as well as the
Right.
if.
And you understand that any member of the public can ask for you to place something on the agenda. It only goes on your agenda if it's within the jurisdictional matter of the board. So sometimes they'll ask for something and it doesn't really belong on your agenda, but you would ask for the superintendent to have proper staff guide them through their questions and whatnot. And as well for the board, right? So a board member might call the president or the superintendent and say, could we get thus and such put on the agenda? I'd really like to have a report on progress with construction or whatever it is. I'm not suggesting that's an issue of interest in your district right now. I'm using it to illustrate a point. If that were to happen, John, what's the current practice right now, or Susanna? Because I understand what Ken's saying, it depends, but I'm wondering if we want to offer a little bit more specificity how you would like this to happen.
So one of the things I'll say that I appreciate is that with the present board, we're trying to be strategic. We're trying to use finite time carefully, especially with everything that's going on. And, you, as we just heard, have every right to request anything to be on the agenda. And I always say that. But what I appreciate is there's usually some conversation around it, because you may want to hear about something and I'm able to say, thank you for that. We actually are planning to bring that special education report in October. Is this urgent or can it wait? You know, that kind of conversation around, I really would like to talk about nutrition. I'm thinking about something, Ken, you mentioned recently. You know, if we could wait till the next meeting, we'll probably be much better prepared based upon the start of school. Of course, Ken says, and then it comes the next meeting. That conversation is so helpful. So I know that that's not very structural, but I think the conversation is key. Secondly, because we meet before every meeting, the president with one other member and I, supported by Cindy, one of the things I'm grateful for since I got here is we focused our support in the superintendent's office differently so that Cindy can be way more connected to this process, because I really think it's important. So the meeting exists every month, and that's the opportunity, whether we hear from the public or whether we hear from you, that we create the agenda. So that's the next piece that I think is important. So Cindy is the, if we talk structural, this is my proposal. Cindy is the person to contact because she kind of oversees. She connects with me so I can have a conversation with you if required. All of that information comes to our monthly agenda setting meeting where we confirm. And then I think from my seat, it's been working great because it has all of those components, even if they haven't been written down. But that's just my thoughts on it. I really want to hear from you because I don't know any, last year was a little bit of a whirlwind, as you know. I mean, we were throwing the agenda because the pandemic shifted within its some weeks, and we simply had to get something on the agenda so that you pretty significant pieces. I can't use last year as the litmus test because I'm hoping for more normal times going forward. So I offered my thoughts. I'm what you think.
And we want to hear from absolutely everyone. I want to ask a question that might help the next step here, John. I understand you have or are proposing its calendar that indicates when board will be hearing reports, and this falls under the theme of accountability, because our job is pretty narrow. Even though the public, some members of the public think we run the district, you really have 5 areas of responsibility. You set the direction, strategic directions. You put the structure in place, you hire the superintendent, and under the superintendent, you're comfortable with policies related to hiring practices and so forth. That's your second. Your fiduciaries, you watch the budget, you prioritize the budget, and you set direction for collective bargaining. We're going to talk a little bit about that too, because that's something that the newer trustees really deserve some assistance in understanding the rhythm of that. And you're responsible for accountability. And that is accountability. Are we moving forward with strategic directions? When is I'm going to come to you with a report and say, this strategy, we tried, it doesn't seem to be working. We want to tweak it, right? All of that, accountability. And then advocacy, which we're going to spend a lot of time talking about. But to your point about first contact Cindy, it goes into the monthly meeting. We see if it belongs on the agenda and where it would be placed. Is that governance calendar really instructive to this process for you, sir? It would help you maybe say, let me put that agenda item, tuck it into here, or...
One of the things, thank you for that, Carolyn. One of the things that I've learned in previous places that has always served well, and I'm bringing a report to you at the next board meeting, so I won't go too much into detail except to say, you've given us clear direction. Those directions have deliverables. We are going to get more specific and move forward because, as I promised, we're going to engage community and so forth. I'd like to create and propose a calendar. So everything related to the equity aspects of this plan, the special education aspects of this plan, the innovation and deep learning aspects of this plan with some clarity. I'm going to ask you next week, give us 6 months to kind of figure out where everything belongs because there's a bit of a connection. And then every time you see that report, you're going to be able to expect certain things. Baseline data, what actions we took, what happened because of the actions we took, what learning needed to take place or did take place, will take place, and our next steps based upon that result. And so there's a bit of a rhythm to it that allows you to always expect that kind of information. Because I find that that's the only way, in my experience, board member truly can provide what I call strategic oversight. Without that, my experience has been, and not with you, in other places, you get requests for great reports. I want to hear more about CTE, career and technical education, career and technical education. Okay, but to have a separate report on that when really in November, when we do deep learning and innovation, we're going to incorporate that. What that structure allows is you call me up and say, are we talking about X? If we're not, we're going to find a place for it because it's obviously, if it's in the strategic directions, we should. Or I can simply say, yes, we're going to bring that in January because if you look at the governance calendar, that's where it exists. And this is what you can expect. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as we talk on that too, because that's the best way I know how to be accountable to you. You may have other ideas on how we enhance, strengthen, or even change what I've said.
Okay, I'll just open it up for board member comments, questions.
I really like how this sounds, and I'd even like to go back to where Ken started about how in the document talking about that staff really brings most of the content to the agenda. It's more of a discussion at the agenda planning time. I think what John described would allow for our procedures to really cover the brunt of our work rather than what they usually do, which is more like the exceptions.
Mhm.
And when you have an issue that you hear about and you want to bring it forward, you know, we can do that in our one-on-ones or we can wait till our agenda time, but having it fit into the big picture
Mhm.
sounds wonderful.
Mhm.
And then our procedures don't have to be in the frame of how do you force your issue, because we don't want it to be about that. We want it to all be working cohesively, supportive.
Right, and it would allow your superintendent to say, that's a great question, or if you're hearing particular concerns about something, you said, let me bring that to you in this report that you're going to get in May, and he's informed, because part of what we're responsible for is the public voice, bringing in the public voice and what we hear, and you can share that with your superintendent, so your reports are sensitized by, you know, we're hearing this out there in the community, and maybe you want to wrap that into your report, and I think you know where to put it. And sometimes things aren't a report to the board. Sometimes they're just information that the board might need or somebody's question. You know,
So often when these procedures kind of get, oh, we have this procedure, it's not even a report board. It's, I want a resolution of action item. And usually that's, you know, that's too much too fast. And so this structure, I think, would be really effective.
terrific.
And I think it kind of reminds us, right? That there are so many things going on that a calendar would just kind of like, oh yes, there's going to be a report, there's going to be information, and holding right district accountable for certain things that we might not remember to bring it forward without some.
Yeah, guiding. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it would be really helpful to have a calendar like that, because for me, the things that maybe my public that I'm hearing from or want to hear about or want to be put on the agenda, that I'm not asking Dr. Malloy about, you know, when are we doing this? When are we doing that? If it's all incorporated into the calendar, I could look at it and say, okay, well, in May, we're going to be doing CTE. And after that, we're going to be doing this other subject. I can also communicate better the people that I'm hearing from that want to hear about whatever subject. So it would really sort of bring together all of us and not have to have, it would cut down on a lot of communications that we won't need to have because it's all there in black and white.
Yeah, and I think it also creates a framework so that we can then see where the gaps are and in the long term, you know, as opposed to so for example, like with the Pride resolution, I just didn't know that it wasn't there, you know, and so then by the time I realized that, it was a little too late to have it on the agenda, and so then it was a process that you know, I was great, but and then also it becomes a public document that the public can see, and they're aware of what we're reviewing, and then they can also be a part of the team that fills in the gaps when they see something that's missing that concerns them. And that kind of brings me to making sure that when we're talking about this, that we also talk about how the protocol for a person in the public to bring an agenda forward.
Okay.
So.
And let's, if you don't mind, let's set the public request aside, which is something we need to and hear from Ronit, and then we'll talk about public as well. But I just want to say this is a really powerful tool for what you just described, which is letting your public know, look, we're talking about it during this time. What do you need to hear? What's on your mind? let me let Dr. Malloy know that you're thinking about that. That is our job. Now, you're going to trust this man to know how deep to go and how far to go, or whether somebody needs a different set, not a set of information, but maybe we need to add a different meeting or a new meeting, right? That will inform his work. That's just a great way to let your public know we're going to be studying this. And I also want to say, the world of advocacy boards use the calendar politely and effectively to let groups that are very interested. I was a board member who was very passionate about serving every student, but I was looking at our students with needs. It was a time in the industry when discussions around autism was really mushrooming, and I was watching it closely, and everything was on our agenda on that topic. I let that community group that was very interested in the subject know. It is their right to go to the meeting. They don't necessarily follow our agendas closely, but I'd say this is something the board is discussing. So that's something you want to keep on, use the tool properly, but keep your community informed. And so we turn to the student representative with regard to the calendar, because you were asking about how to get on the agenda.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm not 100% sure how the process for other board members works, but I do think that if, at least for everybody, if this is not already the case, but in addition for me, if there was a meeting before the board agenda was set with the superintendent, with whoever's involved with that process, it would be better just to be able to kind of voice any concerns or anything which I feel or which any board member feels may need to be addressed, whether that's at the next meeting or the meeting after, or at any time in the future. I really think that working through the conversation, like Dr. Malloy said, would really allow us to kind of understand what can be placed on and get a very comprehensive understanding, and just kind of throwing out an idea via email or at a meeting in a report, and then wait a long period of time before actually being able to discuss it. I really think that having that constructive conversation prior to the agenda being set would allow us to plan that out better. And I think that the other board members meet one-on-one, but if I can be added to that process where I can have a one-on-one meeting, I think that would be great.
If I can just add to that, first off, I think it's a really good idea. We're already taking up Dr. Malloy's time with us one-on-one, but I think it's worthwhile. And I think that her voice in that mix would help as well. The other thing that I found very positive, and Dr. Malloy mentioned it, is it's not just the president and the superintendent in setting the agenda, but with one other board member on a rotating basis. And I found those conversations, even though we're not all participating in, to have that level of detail shared, I think has been very valuable. The one thing that I would add might be a little controversial. In terms of what's conversed before the meeting, in terms of trying to get clarification, that type of thing, I think that's where the separation between the district's responsibilities and our responsibilities as a community we need to take into account. And by that, I mean, yes, there's value in me getting information. However, I'm also looking for community buy-in to the direction that we're taking. So I get in a little bit of trouble asking questions during meetings because actually I want the information to come out publicly.
Yes.
Even if I know the answer. It's kind of like the attorney who goes to court, question unless they know what the answer is going to be. I think there's a lot of value in terms of building community buy-in to the directions we take. One aspect of them, I fully agree with the calendar. And I think that for the deep dive into subjects, I think that's an appropriate way to go. One thing I'd suggest being considered is, and it is a procedural thing, is, and we've tried this last couple of meetings, is moving up the superintendent's report earlier in the meeting, but also make it almost I don't want to carry it too far, but almost a current state district kind of report. If there's something going on, even though we have a lot of different communication streams these days, our board is an opportunity for the board and the public to be hearing everything at that point in time. What's going on, that type of a thing that may take a little bit more time, but may also help in terms of creating that buy-in.
And thanks. And one of the things I try to do when I do think about that report is think about all of the conversations that I've been a part of, think about all of the insights that have emerged in the community in different ways, think about all my conversations, think about what just happened in comment, at least specific to non-advised, because that was always first, and try to weave as the clearest response as possible. Thankfully, one of the things I don't mind doing is thinking on my feet. So I actually change as I'm listening, even that night. Like you actually get just time responses. So I really appreciate that as a criteria that I should always follow. And if I can connect, Rana, to what you were saying, and I think, Ken, you alluded to it, part of the challenge about conversations before meetings is that the law doesn't allow for certain things to happen. So that's why we only have 2 trustees with me, because if there was a third, then we'd actually be outside the bounds. And that's the reality of following Brown Act legislation very important, which is why Cindy's role is so important, because what happens is things can come into me and us. I'm allowed to move individually towards you, but whenever it's anything more significant, it can't be more than the 2. And so I wanted to clarify that, just because I think your question was amazing, but to help clarify why we don't have a lot of conversations like this, because we need to be in a space like this where our public can listen and respond appropriately if, different agenda, there's public comments that are done different today and so forth.
Exactly.
So I just wanted to offer that.
Yes, exactly.
And if I can just add one thing, John, I do want to acknowledge, given my comments, how much I appreciate your use of the superintendent's report time. We've had superintendents, and I've loved all of our superintendents, but they usually, by the time we got to that point in the evening, it was like, okay, you've heard everything, we're finished. They've been taking time to utilize that time appropriately.
Thanks.
Can I ask, in regard to Ron's request, legally, how does he fit in terms of the Brown Act and 2 versus him coming in? I'm just curious. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like if he joined 2 board members, is that legal?
Well, he's not a voting member per se, and he's not an elected official by the constituent of San Ramon Valley. But it can lead to an appearance of impropriety, because how do you distinguish the student board member from perhaps another elected board member? So you want to keep it pretty even throughout your processes. The uniformity in process becomes really important. And that's why you want to have a rotating team of 2, because you'll never have any violations of the Brown Act. Because it takes a person, just one person being out, and another person sitting in, say, for you, and you recognize, oh, we generally have 3 board members. Let's bring in 3 people, because there's another person filling in and they don't understand the nuances of the Brown Act. So from an operational perspective, it's probably really good to have a standard practice of 2 board members. Now, as part of the rotating unit, if the board were to consider having the student board members sit in on one of those Brown Act agenda meetings, that's your pleasure, that's your prerogative. But I would say that we have a uniform process, not to take away your.
And I think for the kind of issues that you're looking to put forward and ask questions, just based on your most recent reports, I'm thinking you might get far more out of it and be able to be more responsive to the student senate if you did have scheduled time with John, whether it was weekly or biweekly, or semi-weekly, whichever made sense, or if there's an advisor to the student senate, maybe there's an opportunity for that, because you've got a lot to learn about in terms of systems and how long it takes to make decisions about things like psychology and stuff like that, right? And I think you would kind of ease into your job better with that kind of free-flowing discussion rather than having to bring things up at the dais.
Yeah.
And if, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, and I was going to say, and I think we would benefit too from, as a board and as a cabinet, from your direct feedback from, on a biweekly basis or meeting basis, whatever.
And I'll just add that student trustee, all board members, the reason why I reach out to you individually, which is what I appreciate, is that then I can, if the president isn't aware of something, because you may not have had a conversation, I'm able to say, well, I was talking to board member Bratt, and what we were talking about for the agenda is. Similarly, that is another avenue, which is why the trustee structure, the student board member structure is evolving. I've learned from other districts that's why Mr. Campopiano is connected to you. That's why Cindy's connected to you, and that's why I'm connected to you, because it's kind of it's different in that our student senate and all of our students expect something from you now. And what I've learned is that without good structure around that, you'll stop time to be a student. And that is something that I've experienced. And I'm saying this with absolute respect that you're also a 12th grade student with lots of things. And our job is to be sure we're giving you the right conditions and support. So we'll keep figuring that out, because it's new here in San Ramon, but it's not new in other places. And I think that even if we don't solidify all of those pieces today, just know it's our commitment that we're going to keep working on it and getting better. So we can fix that.
I think with this being a new position, this is a great year to kind of try on the approach that works, and maybe get to the point that you say more solidify. But yeah, it's terrific, the conversation you're having here, because I think there's a little bit more clarity about how you get an item in. The calendar is going to be very helpful, sir. I'm sure that look forward to seeing that from you. And so how you get something on the agenda fits into this overarching calendar that is driving your work, right? So that your agenda, to Ken's point, isn't reactive to things that are coming up, though we do need to be responsive, but it's really driving the direction of the district, holding it, the words holding accountable sound punitive in nature, but what we just want is, and as you've just being a learning organization, this is what we want to achieve. Are the efforts in place working? Do we need to modify them? Let us know. This seems like a board's like, let us know. If it's not working, move it, change it. And so that's what that calendar is. We want to fit into that. So I think we've covered agenda, setting it as much as we need to at this time. And
Just to clarify the public, though, how.
oh,
the
yes,
public-
I glossed over that, and I did not do. I beg your pardon. Yes. Okay, good. Yes. Yeah, there is a board bylaw for that, and it is, maybe you want to articulate what the process is for public Namita, because that's pretty standard. It's
Generally speaking, you have a member of the public that either sends an email or requests from a board member that an item be considered. And if you are not the board president, it generally goes up to the board president, who then incorporates it as part of the agenda setting process. I think the tricky part that comes into play is whether or not you have time on the next agenda to consider that item. Practically speaking, everyone wants that item to be considered immediately at the upcoming board meeting. There is nothing there in the statute itself that says that it has to be considered at the next board meeting, but it should not be avoided as a pushing the public interest in a particular item down the road. You want to be responsive to it, but adhere to an internal process of prioritizing what issues are really important. If it falls within your jurisdiction, but you don't have time on the next agenda because there are other big items happening that have timelines and deadlines, then you may defer it to a meeting down the road. But that is a consideration that happens with the board president and the superintendent as they sit together and draft the agenda.
Can I just I'll just take a quick minute to be a devil's advocate. So how, from a playing standpoint, what does it look like when a member of the public asks us, for example, to make a resolution on a mask mandate? How do we go about, and that's not really in our jurisdiction. Is that the process? I know I'm kind of poking the bear.
And
but-
if I could add to this, because I think we
Sure.
do need clarification here, because
Sure.
I've seen this go tremendously well, and I've seen this go tremendously challenging ways. you as the body have to deal with something that falls within your jurisdiction, but how you deal with that something is your decision if it's within your authority, or not your decision if it's outside of your authority. In other words, to actually educate will. The reason I say that is because I have been in a district where anytime someone wanted a report from the public, it became the board who gave it to us, and we got no strategic work done ever. We're constantly running to respond in ways that didn't do anything except have us writing reports. If you want something, by all means, I've always said that to any board I work with, of course, you ask for it. But could you clarify how the board receives and works with, following all ed code requirements, that type of request that comes from our public? So we are responsive, we are hospitable, but we're also able to, do focused work.
Namita, can you distinguish between something that the public asks to have on the agenda and also a resolution?
That is the key in the question.
Okay.
So what the public is asking you, even if they use the word resolution, is for you to revisit the policy around masking. And I know this is like the hottest topic currently. Just because they use the word resolution doesn't automatically mean it needs to be an action item. You can have it in pieces. You can have a study. So let's take away mask because it's a hot button issue and it is set by CDPH. We have no authority over that. So let's take something else, whether it's the pass-fail graduation requirement, right? Something less emotive.
Maybe something else.
As a mother of a junior in high school, I misspoke. It is very emotive. But something's more rote. You may just decide that the interest coming in from the public is around the policy that you have or the policy that you to examine. So you can take that and put it in the agenda. It could be an action item. It could be an information-only item. It could be a study item. It could be anything that you think is appropriate. And if you think that it is an appropriate policy change that we ought to consider, but it needs to happen in multiple steps, that's fine. So it can come to board meeting number 1 as a information study item, and then from that, you develop a policy that happens down the road. So it's not a one-shot, all-encompassing action. Right. So you've got to operationally work for it, because the other thing that happens is if you get a request like that results in a request for resolution or immediate action, operationally, all the impacts on the organization are not studied. So it may just be that you are studying the student impact, and going back to the mask mandate, many of the parents that's a request coming from the parent side, but the implication of any change in the policy on the collective bargaining pieces that you're responsible for as employers, that also comes into play. So it's not an automatic, you have to do one action item just because somebody brought it in. I would take a more broader approach around the request. And so for me, the request is to study the mask policy or the mandate.
Let me ask you this question, Namita, on their behalf, and as a former trustee who was always confused by this. So we're going to bond over this one. It's Arts Appreciation Week.
Mhm.
Recognition of the power of the arts and all things great and good. And we want to pass a resolution in support of arts education, and my husband, who's a musician, I think he should be mentioned in there. So keep just so what that is not necessarily policy per se, but somebody would bring that forward to, let's talk through that. Somebody would bring it to you, John, or Cindy, and say, I think that this would be a lovely place to offer a resolution in support of the arts or whatever. How do you want your board, because we're hearing about these from all different organizations and movements. And so and it's not necessarily policy or grades or late start or school uniforms, but it's just a recognition of library week, counselors, music. We about this, and it's not on the resolutions. How do you want a board member to handle that?
So there's a couple thoughts that come to me, and I've shared this with our board in public before. I'll say it again, that because time is finite, and our staff is doing our very best to meet all of the expectations, how you help us prioritize is key. Because if at every meeting we are asked to do a considerable amount of deep dive studies or what have you, it just time that you you have that authority. It's just how you invite us to do that is important. So I want to say that because I'm coming from a place of experience where the work of serving kids in schools in one particular place almost stopped for our district team because we were so busy trying to meet this type of requirement. I'll tell you how I feel about resolutions, but you don't have to agree with me. Again, depending upon what you expect when we pass a resolution to honor X, B, Y, whatever. In some districts, it's just, this is Autism Awareness Month. It takes 2 minutes. In other districts, there's an expectation for a more comprehensive report kind of outlining our work. District, there is an expectation that each school site engages in some specific way. There's probably other variations of the theme, but those are the that come to mind. That has an impact if there are 50 resolutions versus 15. What is your expectation about it? I love when a district, and this is why we are proposing to have a workshop where you discuss everything you've been hearing. We look at historical decisions that have been made. You decide where you want to add or where you might want to take away. And we build into our process something you've done before, but we really think deeply about it, that once a year we revisit that list as a significant action item, and that the door opens once a year. You bring all the insights in, unless there seems to be a gaping hole, one that you feel to be filled. I think we experienced that with Laura's bringing forward the Pride Month piece. I think there needs to be a place for that, because you could have all decided that it was going to happen then, or it was going to wait till this strategic report that I'm considering. So long story short, I am of the opinion to try to do things focused way so that we're not struggling, trying to keep up. So once a year we revisit, once a year we think about our expectations, how we did previously, how you want us to proceed going forward, what comes on, what comes is a proposal. If a board member wants to bring it on, just let or Cindy know or the president know, and it can become part of agenda setting if you don't want to wait for whatever valid reason you might have for that once a year deep dive into it. That's a proposal. That's not a suggestion that needs to be followed, but you asked my, so
Yeah,
I
no,
gave it.
we have to start from some place, and I think that there's the work that's related to policy, and as Namita said, it's not a quick decision. What are the implications across the organization? No action in education is without a reaction somewhere. We all know that. But then there are these resolutions that come to us, and so you're suggesting once a year, and I turn it to the trustees to I'm sure there could be exceptions, but that would not be the preference. You want to really tidy this up.
But again, I want to just emphasize, as your superintendent, I don't mind when you call me up and say, I'd really like to do this for these reasons. Like, I don't want anything you're hearing me say trying to silence voices or influence. I really appreciate that. I'm just saying, from a structural place, if this becomes the norm with room for, I really think we need to revisit this before December, because it's important for these reasons, has to have a place as well. It's kind of a little bit of a both and.
Yeah, it has to be balanced, right? I mean, if the expectation is once a year and everyone knows it, including public, it's, again, this calendar, right? It's very important. But then if there's something happens, because there might be something that happens and we need to address it quicker, more immediate, then we can
Bring it
so,
to the superintendent.
yeah, can't be all like, quick all the time, because then we are just reacting and we can't do strategic work. But I think that it can't always be like, well, that's like 9 months down the road. something happens. So it has to be the balance.
Well, and I think it might be helpful to talk about what is really the purpose of a resolution. I think in some of our resolutions, it's particular groups need to be seen and they need to be acknowledged and their challenges need, so some of it is very much aligned with inclusion and diversity. And those groups new groups are surfacing, new special interests in a positive way surface. I don't think you can then say, oh, but we've had Black History Month forever. We're not going to do that anymore, right? Those you kind of have to keep in the mix. The other resolutions come up because of particular issues that maybe aren't part of that. And so we might even want to be looking at different kinds. And maybe when new ones come in, we look at where do they fit in the grand, where are they similar? And the answer doesn't have to be no, you can't have this new one. It's how does this new one work with the old one, or just something that's kind of like creating it in a calendar and making. But I think it's important for people to be seen. It's important to keep that door open.
I agree. I guess one thing I want to make sure is that, and I think this is why we went to the once a year in the first place. We don't want to over politicize the process either, and start dealing with international affairs and things that some government agencies do. Really making sure that we focused on how it relates to what we do in education right here in the Valley. The one other thing I wanted to say on this is I think a foundational aspect to our meetings is making sure that our public at least has the opportunity to understand that this is a working meeting of the board. And if someone comes forward and wants to add something to the agenda, that does not mean that they now should expect to have the 20-minute presentation rather than a 3-minute comment. What it means is that you bring something forward and it's going to go into the mix with staff to determine its appropriateness and what work might need to be done. And the staff's going to give a presentation. And depending upon the circumstance, maybe an expert in that area may be asked to participate, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get an opportunity to jump in and take over a board meeting because you want something.
You need to run your board meetings. You're only a board when you're in meetings, and you have to tend to the work of the district. And what we're hearing as an overarching theme, I just want to restate, is you want to be driving in a positive way the directions, the goals, the strategic directions of the organization. On any given day, there are a million moving parts underneath you, maybe not a million, although Dr. Malloy and staff certainly feel that way. At the same time, you want to be asking in your board meetings, in addition to tending to all those moving parts, executive orders, 6 feet, 3 feet, we could all build our long list over the last year. What are we doing to drive all down the field? And so, yeah, Ken, what I hear there, you do have to run the meetings, and you do need to tend to the work of the district. And I heard, Rachel, in your comments, as ideas for resolutions come forward, we might look at how a few are blended together to recognize, in accordance with your values, your and you don't need to become just a platform for everybody's, resolution for, the Terrell and Flinders Day of the Year is not necessary. I don't think it's in accordance with your values. No. Sorry. Okay. So anyway.
The one other thing I would, and I think this might be an appropriate place to add it, another aspect though that gets away from resolutions that we haven't really spent much time on is as a body, acknowledging, recognizing key things that do go on in the community, particularly as it ties into education. So into many, many events where the Board of Supervisors has provided just a certificate. It's not, part of the meeting, but it's another aspect of the procedures. The local city council does. And it just has something I've seen too often where something educationally is being recognized by the city council, but the school board hasn't said anything about it. And it's not necessarily even bringing someone to the meeting, but somehow finding a way of acknowledging educational achievements through a certificate, even something like that.
So in other districts that I've worked in, we simply built in to our board meeting each month if there were any recognitions that were needed, or even if it was more, if it was simpler, adding to the president's comments. Like, there are different ways to do it depending upon how you would like. We have done it since I've been here a few times, where we take a portion of the meeting, we put it on the agenda, and we celebrate Teacher of the Year, or we celebrate some other aspect of what's going on in our district. I find that it can get unwieldy without parameters, because to celebrate and where do you draw the line? But I think that if we had that subcommittee that's going to be meeting to help us flesh this out, to think about when the following things are in play, we're going to honor that, we're going to recognize that in a certain way. And it could be even, it could be a presentation where we offer something like we've done. It could simply be mentioned by the president in the president's report, as a member of the board, or your board report. But there are things that we can decide so that there's at least some guidance around how to do it. That's where I'm going with it. Yeah.
Nice. I'm glad you brought that up. Good. Any thoughts?
Can I just add one point? I just want us to consider that resolutions generally only have two purposes, theoretically, right? So one is, say, and this is not a very good example, but it's the first one that's coming to my mind. If you're doing a layoff, you generally have a layoff resolution. You adopt that resolution. So there are legal purposes for resolution. So that is one kind of resolution. The other kind of resolution generally that districts use is to honor people, right? Classified employee month, you know exactly what month that is. You're going to adopt a resolution to acknowledge and say thank you to all your classified employees. So that is the other kind of resolution. Certain districts have taken on that second kind of acknowledgement and broadened it. So we saw it when NCLB first came out, when, No Child Left Behind, you had military recruiters going and recruiting high school students. And so there were large districts utilizing the resolution platform to sort of utilize some amount of political speech, which was tied to a tangible student-related opportunity. And I really want us to be cautious as we work in resolutions, that we are truly limiting our resolutions to either a legal issue or really trying to acknowledge whether it's, inclusivity, utilization of pronouns. I mean, that kind of work rather than political speech. Because what happens is with the political speech issues, the board gets mired in either litigation or public bombardment. And so I just think if you're going to use resolutions, just always think through whether it is a legal issue or are we really truly acknowledging a person. If we really want to adopt or have a discussion about perhaps a policy that is contrary to what we have, or people want to change in policy, let's not use that. Let's use a different process. So that is probably what I want to sort of distinguish.
Can I just say, I really appreciate that, because the last thing I would want to have to do is vote no on a resolution. It raises, a very muddy type of environment when something's brought up and it's supposed to be positive, but because you just can't do it for whatever reason, it sends a different.
If I could ask, because I think this is so important, could you just give us a quick brief over that last sentence you made? It doesn't need to be a resolution. It could be some other process. In my experience, what Namita, you just said is so important. Maybe someone on this circle wants to know how you're defining what that means.
Okay, I'll use the mask. That is, people up and down the state are bringing out resolutions for against the mask mandate. So I am not going to get into the politics of it. But really, as a board, your only mandate is to follow the law. If you're adopting a resolution, what you're saying is we don't like the law. And that does not accomplish anything. it does not accomplish the kind of discussion that mother who's not happy that her child has to wear a mask, it's not getting to the root of her problem, which is a discussion around how can we make sure that your child is focused and productive for the entire school day. So you don't have to adopt a resolution for that. You can have a different kind of discussion. You can have a different kind of acknowledgement. If it's a different kind of issue, you can have a report. You can have students come and present and give them a certificate of recognition. There could be separate times where kids can come in and present on stuff against Gender Club, where they are using pronouns inclusive. There are different ways to do it. You just don't always have to talk about a resolution being the only way to publicly adopt a position. And I think that's where sort of boards get too political. And I don't mean it like that. It's your prerogative to be political, but the board meetings get politicized. And really, we are running the business of the school, and you want to be as non-political about it. It's getting into a territory that is not necessary. And I just think it brings down the level of emotive reaction to the discourse. And you want to apply all those other processes to acknowledge and have the discussion and perhaps look at data points and look at effective ways to make the student more engaged rather than adopting a resolution.
I just think the fundamental question is what to accomplish. And if you look at resolutions, I'm glad you brought that up, Namita. Legal, a resolution around layoffs, that's our obligation. Or more, an honor or a statement. And I think we're looking at some resolutions that you immediate passed in your meetings about your every student and the climate you seek to create in your schools. And I just think getting down, John, to the what do we seek to accomplish, getting close to if it's policy, you're going to go another way. And if it's politics, why are we doing that? And it is, you are elected, you are politicians to some extent. So there may be a place where the board says we want to do this. But I think what we've heard Ken say very bravely, and I appreciate it, is I don't want to be put in a position where I'm the one voting no, because it can be misunderstood by the public. All you're saying, and there are times you're going to vote, you guys, you don't always agree, but I think you're agreeing to a process by which you study this.
And to address the purpose, I think many of the resolutions that have come in the years and grown the list are education, not in terms of just learning, but community, district-wide enlightenment about a particular need.
Right.
Or
But
a group that is needing something. So
correct.
pride, just
Autism awareness.
all of
Yes,
those. And
autism.
so I just think we're going to have to think of them as a group and be consistent with them, not to say
Right.
that's recognition and that one's not, because that would get political if we
Right.
were picking and choosing.
Well, and let's just speak frankly, and meetings have been put online, and people watch meetings any place, and if they're advocating for a political position, or even if it's not political, and for a particular topic, they can turn to city council meetings anywhere, board of supervisors anywhere, board of education anywhere. I deal with a district in Southern California, 600 people from Florida attended their meeting to share their point of view on something, and they have a right to speak up, but they're not even lower brats of, and the Shelleys, Clarks of the district wanted to know, are my own constituents, the people who are here from our community. So anyway, I think it's something to keep an eye on, and it's very helpful discussion. And I'm going to, and I'm going to remind you that it's 10:30, and I'm going to move through 4 other things.
And this will be very quick. One of the other things that I think is important is because you set policy, and there's a process for that, because you passed our strategic directions, which we had a process for that. I will always be clear with you about how I believe I and staff are adhering to that. The 2 conversations that we might have outside of resolutions is, do you want to change the policy if what we're doing isn't serving us any longer? Or do you want to ask me about, are you sure you're following the policy, which could be a conversation we have at a board meeting? Similarly, that same process can happen around our strategic directions. You wonder why something's going on. It's on the agenda. We talk about it. The commitment I make to you is that I will always point to where in policy or where in our strategic directions some actions lie. Always open to your feedback that maybe you have a different perspective around that. We'll feed back to you in that public space what I've heard. It doesn't necessarily need a resolution if we're all on the page that we're moving forward. If we're not, it's my job to say, I need clearer direction. And there's a process for that. It's very different than what we're talking about. The board, in my experience, is working with the superintendent in this way. Mountains can get moved because you're really actually staying focused on our roles in relationship to each other. The trust is there, even if it's hard, even if we don't agree, and there's a clear path to get to good places. So thank you for this. This last 30 minutes, I think, was, for me, exceptionally helpful.
Well, good. And again, met each other during COVID and had to dive right in, and now you get to say how we do this together. So I think that's I can't be the only one who had a roommate where I wanted to say, could we just sit down and agree to the rules here? So thank you for that. We're going to move on to this trustee request for information. This would be information on agenda items in advance of the meeting, where maybe you read something and it's not completely clear to you, or I remember being a new trustee and not completely clear on how to read a budget chart, and I needed a quick tutorial, whatever that might be. Currently, I believe this is your question goes into your superintendent, and is that how you want to continue, sir?
Again, relying on Cindy as well as me. I love when it comes to me and Cindy is copied on anything you need, because then Cindy, you get to play, okay, this is Denise Jennison who's going to help us. This is Christine Huardo who's going to help us. I love that we can be mission control just so that we can actually move quicker. And I just want to say that I'm grateful for how you operate. So to place it in public, you know, when you give us a heads up around what it is you really want to know more about, I'll use the public space so that everybody hears the same thing. It's great, because then we can be that much more prepared. And I also appreciate that when any of you ask an individual question, you that I am ensuring that all of you get the answer, even if you don't have that question. So what's written in that box from this sample is, I think, great practice from my perspective, but obviously you may want to add to it or shift something.
Well, I know currently sometimes, you know, if I do a question, or I'm hearing from emails and other communications, I might actually reach out, depending on what the is, right, or the issue, to like our assistant superintendent, you know, Christine Corrado for education. But I always copy you so that you know, right? So it's not like we always, I mean, that's how I'm operating, and it's good that we're having this conversation so we're all clear. But it's not always like, John, what is like everything, right? I mean, I kind of also utilize the experts, but always letting you know.
The place, and that's fine.
Okay.
The parameter I would offer you, because again, I've experienced and worked with multiple boards now, that what Susanna just said works great when all is well in the world. When all is not well in the world, and I'll pray that never comes to San Ramon, it becomes a little more difficult because we have roles and responsibilities and there's power dynamics and all the rest. So for good practice perspective, I would invite you to keep those types of direct requests for information at the executive cabinet level, and let the executive cabinet member like Christine connect with someone. Not because I'm trying to draw a boundary between you and this wonderful staff of ours. It just keeps things flowing, especially if things down the road, and I don't want to certainly state it would get difficult. So connecting it to the executive cabinet, copying me just so I'm aware. I'm perfectly great not having everything come towards me as long as there's an understanding. And don't worry, if you might forget, our written understanding among it is when they're responding, they will copy me. That's fine too, because I this because we want to do good things for everybody in our community. So that kind of parameter I think is really important just for health of our organization.
And I want to clarify again for the that's viewing and view later a recorded version of your discussion. Your objective is to have your deliberations in public, to conduct your work in public. That's your legal obligation. That is, everyone has shared your commitment. We're just talking about gathering information in advance, clarifications on an agenda item, or if somebody's asked you a question and you don't know the answer to it and you're kind of curious, fine, executive cabinet, we hear that. But I want to underscore something that Ken said, and that is you may get an answer to a question and say, I'm going to repeat this in public because so many people are interested in this, and I want to make sure that our public, so you, while you might be satisfied on behalf of the public you represent, that question has been satisfactorily answered regarding a city report or something coming out of Danny Hillman's area, right? Excellent, sounds solid. I'm hearing this in public. Could I please, Superintendent, have Danny Hillman explain to the public the answer I thought was really very, very excellent with regard to that CEQA question. And I shifted from masks to CEQA because CEQA used to be very controversial, but anymore we really just talk about it as much as we
And
talk
it's
about
also
it.
the fair thing to staff so that they're prepared with an answer rather than waiting till the meeting and then they have to say, I'll get back to you. So,
Right. And that said, questions will come up organically at the dais. Sure. And you need to ask them. And questions that you might be asking, Shelley or Susanna, might prompt me to say, yeah, I hadn't really considered following, and I need you. And if your staff says, we need to get back to you on that, they'll get back to you on that. If they can answer it there, they'll answer it there. Your meetings, you want staff to be as prepared as possible to get you the information you need in the board meeting, because you're only a board when you're in a meeting. That they're not orchestrated to a point where you can't or ask a question that has come up. That is your job. And so I know that you know that, but I'm articulating it because I want everyone listening to us today to understand that you're committed to that. Correct?
Carolyn, can you clarify something because it comes up from time to time? So board members hear from the community about something that's unclear. The board member asks me. Oftentimes, if I'm hearing a lot of confusion around something, it makes it into the next community update from me. The trouble is sometimes the community is looking for the board members to do something more direct, and sometimes serve the community in the appropriate way possible. They want to know where the board member's voice is, where their advocacy is, and all the rest. If something's not on the agenda that might be confused out there, there's not really a place for the kind of questioning that you've just described. If it's agenda, then I've said to all of our board members, just ask the tough questions. I have no issue with all the tough questions. Letting me know what you might want to question ahead of time just allows us to be more prepared. But if you don't have it beforehand, I still don't mind the questions. All you have to be okay with is I might have to say, we're going to get back to you on that. But for the most part, our team could probably answer much of it. How does the board member deal with it if their public's expecting something? And I'll say there, because there's some people out there who think that you represent that area, therefore, ... We are meeting the need because I'm putting it in an update so everybody's getting the same information. It's not on the agenda so that the board member can actually show like that they are on this issue. Can you help us with that? Because that's, I think, of what's crossing my desk. I won't speak for the board members in the last year of intensity around all the issues we're struggling with.
Right. And so I'm trying to, could we put an example on it? Maybe one that you've currently dealt with, but just could you put an example on it so I can kind of.
Okay, yes. So we're not talking about budget related issues at the next board meeting. But some of our public through our board members have been asking questions about budget related matters.
Mhm.
I take all those questions and with the help of our team, something for a community up. In other words, we've tried to answer the question in another way because it's not coming up on the agenda. And then that other board member might get challenged after the next board meeting. I asked you to represent about where those dollars went and why those dollars were spent in that. That is the most concrete example that's on my mind at the moment.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm going to need it to really listen hard here because I want to make sure I can give you as savory from your lens as well. But I'll just share with you a strategy that I used, that I would get back to people and say, I've asked that question of staff and they're going to include it in this report and it'll be presented to the board in February. Or I've asked those questions of staff and Dr. Malloy will be answering. Or I try to get back to them and let them know. Sometimes I have the answer, depending on the topic, I can get back to them. And often I'll just say, thank you very much. I just want to repeat the questions I'm hearing from you. They are the following, and I will make sure they're presented to staff. I might work through you to understand when are those questions going to be answered for them and how. And I would also say, I'm not necessarily ask these questions from the dais, but I have fed them into staff, I assure you. I let them know that they've been heard, and I genuinely pour that information into you and say, we need to get back to them in some way. And there were times that and we're going to talk about public outreach. I know you've wanted to talk about that and being accessible to your public. There were times I too, met with groups, but I always worked through staff to do that. So, but that's separate and discrete, and we're going to talk about that before we go.
For your comment, because it's crossed my desk from our board members. You answered the way that I answer, so I just wanted to test that, and I'm grateful.
I just let them know the comments in the board meeting aren't the only place that I can share my voice. Superintendent, I have collected your questions just to make sure I haven't missed any. Boom, 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 boom. Does that capture the essence of what you're looking for? I have shared that with staff, and they are going to be, and if maybe it fits in that calendar, maybe there's some other place it fits, they'll be looking at it in committee. Depends on what the topic is. I remember parents were asking me, this is a good example. I went to a PTA meeting at the high school. The library was packed, and parents were pretty inflamed that we weren't returning tests, midterms and finals. And Las Virgenes not being short on its share of parent attorneys, they knew their rights and they knew if their child's name was on the test that it belonged to. So it was a controversy and it had policy implications. And I was standing there thinking policy implications, labor implications. I could hear it ping-ponging in there, right? In a good way. As ping pong might not be a good, because I was like, what was I thinking of one of those? What is it? Work with me here, people. You pinball. Okay, I need youth on my side here. Thank you so much. You win. Amita, somebody was going to win a car today, weren't they? No, I'm just kidding. Okay. So anyway, it's just exploding. And what I said to them, John, was I will take these back to the district and you will hear from the superintendent on how to respond. Then I did the superintendent. I alone cannot give you direction. I understand that. But I do think it would be a really good idea if this went into committee to be looked at. The curriculum committee headed by Christine of sorts, and they did look at it and they landed, by the way, and the parents just wanted immediate action. I did go back to them and I said, if we take immediate action, it might not be the best action. It really might not be. Please let them study it. And in fact, where we landed, just to close that for you by putting it in committee, realized that consistent across the district, we did not have formative. We had summative, but not formative. And we committed to giving formative to all students and letting them take them home, and that all summative was from formative, right? And they also further realized that their scaffolding for math before chemistry was off. And if they had looked at the math requirements before chemistry, our kids they had the most wonderful conversation. The owners of this, chairs of math, chairs of science, the people we trust to teach our kids, the student voice was involved in those discussions. So John, that's just an example of each situation is different. I just want them to know I heard your question. I hear them. I've shared them. I might not be asking board meeting. That doesn't mean I pass them on. Please be assured of that. And try that, but live up to it, obviously. Maybe that helps. And you,
Thank you.
You make it back to them about committees as well.
Just one more comment about board communications with staff members. Just want to draw the distinction between, as we've been talking about, questions, clarifications, as opposed to asking for someone to do work, per se. Do a report, something like that, that requires a significant effort, maybe not just of the assistant superintendent, but of their staff as well. And it starts getting into an area of micromanagement that the board does not have authority for. In my tenure, I've seen sometimes when board members have stepped over the line and have really gotten into, not lately, have gotten in the way of even the superintendent and that superintendent's responsibility as the supervisor of staff. So it's just making that distinction too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clarifications are great.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll make a note of that. We'll find in the ad hoc committee some language to add there because a question can sound like an awful lot of work. And we do want to liberate the superintendent to say, did you really mean to give staff 25 hours of work? Because that's about what it would take. And we will memorialize that, Ken, because I do think moving forward, that's important for you. Okay.
Can I just add one thing here? As we talk about best practices and the example that you gave where you would directly contact someone in the executive cabinet, I would just have a little note of caution. If you're asking for broad data, fine. But if you're getting into specific student issues or if you're getting into specific personnel issues, I would not do that. I think the better way would be directly dealing with the superintendent on that issue. So that's the only caveat.
And if I can just add for your consideration, and then at the ad hoc committee, I've always followed a couple parameters that make what I just said previously better. And thanks for one of them. Issues that are highly sensitive and private in nature, which need a closed meeting. That's what I would always say, come to me. It's just easier. But the other one that I always use, just so that, to Ken's point, I have pretty significant boundaries when it comes to requests, hospitable that I try to be. If it's new work that doesn't exist versus work that's happened and we just need to communicate and clarify, those are two different things. If it's new work, I'm very respectful to my team who are here the same. That does need board direction because that work hasn't happened. And so I'm pretty clear about that. I've asked my team to be pretty clear about that. When you're asking for something, it's either because we need to clarify something, we need to communicate that which already exists. It's not new work. It's just helping move us all forward positively. I wanted you to know that that's pretty much how I do things. But if you want to consider, or for me to consider something different, then we can have that ad hoc discussion and then bring it back to a board process.
My understanding of Susanna's question was you're reading your board pack for the meeting, and Christine Huardo is the cabinet member whose name is on that item. So in the essence of time, you write to Cindy, John, and Christine just to, that was, I think, where you were.
Right, yeah.
That was like the only time where we would go below John, right?
So to speak.
But again, I just, as a executive cabinet team, we're trying to work really collaboratively. And I like to know, but I don't need to be in the middle of everything. I just want to know. My team knows that. I like to know, but I don't need to be the driver of all, especially if somebody else carries the wisdom.
So I'm going to move out of order here, and I'm just following this guide. But I do want to just expand on something Namita said. It's really very best practice if you're hearing from a community member or an employee about a student or an employee. Our job isn't to answer that. You are not the 800 number. Our job is not to answer that. Our job is to make sure there's a structure in place for that voice. You need to speak with the principal. I don't want to speak with the principal. Please, our job is to really not to push them off of your desk. Your job in policy is to have a structure so there is a place for their voice. If you hear from someone and you don't know where their voice would rightfully belong with that concern, that is good to John or staff and say, because you want to understand that structure. And the reason for that is obvious, but also maybe not so obvious, especially when we're newer. Decisions about students or employees may come to you in closed session. And if you have been involved in listening to a parent talk about the situation their child has been experiencing, you may have to recuse yourself from your very important work, which is to make decisions and we've watched this happen to me where like 4 or 5 board members had to recuse themselves and they had to figure out who to get in to oversee the next steps with regard to discipline. And so maybe you just want to stress that because I think the public wants us to listen to them and help them sometimes employees do as well. That's not your job, and for good reason.
Yeah, I think an individual board member does not carry weight. I mean, this is the theme of this day, right? No, you collectively as the board, you carry the weight. And so when an individual board member, and this is a scenario, it's to the extreme, but it's happened over and over in various districts where an individual board member shows up to the HR office and wants to talk about a teacher who's performing not well, and their community is up in arms about Miss Jackson, and who's teaching 10th grade algebra, and the individual board member wants to see their personnel file. He wants to see where this person has come from, what kind of experience did they bring. They're addressing their community concern, but that individual board member does not have the authority of the board to go and ask for the personnel file. So they're truly acting as one individual member of the public. And so if you share that piece of information, what you've just done is opened up your entire personnel system to one random member of the public. You would never do that. And so it undermines your systems. And I think that is where the concern lies.
Parents and children or employees. So just make sure you know the structure. And board meeting management, I think that you have, there's some good language down here. If you want to add, if there's any aspect of your meetings you want to add here, I would suggest that there isn't really much specificity around speakers, and you do have board bylaws on speakers, 20 minutes, a certain amount of time per speaker. You also have the privilege of adjusting that time. So if I've watched districts where the room is full and they have 100 speaker cards and the president has said, we will hear from everyone, but I'm restricting the time to a minute so that we can hear from everyone. I would articulate that in here, and it is in your bylaws. And because this document is a little easier for a new trustee to read, and to your point, when you're new, to understand sort of the rhythm of the meetings. Is there anything else?
Can you talk a little bit about, we have our bylaws and we have this, now we're going to have this handbook, how those fit together or how they overlap?
Yeah, one complements the other. One is just a little bit more friendly, and it sort of consolidates all of these documents into one place that are sort of the more regulars of your everyday work.
So have Rosenberg's Rules of Order.
Mhm.
So that is incorporated to all of this also.
The one area that I found to be worthwhile under motion deliberation, I've always seen us as a board working towards consensus on issues that are more than just a routine. So you get the consent calendar, and as long as everyone's agreed, everything on the consent calendar is what I have found difficult at times, though, is if a motion is put on the table on a more complex topic. If a motion is put on the table too soon, it creates possibly more difficulty in coming to a consensus. Because now, again, as I was saying with resolutions, having to vote something simply because we didn't have the fuller conversation before the motion was even made.
Like switch 3 and 4.
Yeah, I kind of see the motion, in a sense, because we are staff driven in terms of the agenda, the motion informally is being placed on the agenda item already by staff as a recommendation. And so, one of the first things that we do is once staff, and going by this list, staff gives its explanation, the first thing we do is normally turn to board members for clarifying questions, not comments, not discussion. Then we move to public comment. Then we continue the board discussion, again, trying to reach that consensus, and then a motion comes out of that consensus. And again, even on action items, there are times when something is in front of us for procedural reasons that we don't really have a staff report. It's just we have to do it as an action item. That a motion quickly is all we really need. Other times, though, I find that that process really helps to get the item fully clarified and discussed so that we can put the best possible option on the table and still have even opportunities for further discussion if necessary.
Sure.
Just
Excellent,
put
excellent.
that forward.
It avoids the altering the motion. right?
Exactly.
So sometimes then after you hear all the information, you're like, I don't want to move that anymore. I've made it.
Yeah, and
Right, that's-
sometimes that happens anyway.
Yeah.
You know, a motion finally does
Sure.
get on the table, and then there's, you know, a revision to it, you know, amendment, and we go through the, you know, the procedural process. However, I think prior to that, trying to build consensus first also provides the public the opportunity to really hear what we're going through. So it doesn't sound like it's all a done deal before the thing even gets to our table. And that's, I think it's been valuable.
Yeah.
And including that board clarification piece in between 1 and 2 sometimes helps address some of the public comment, you know, kind of front load.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We're already concerned about this part. You don't need to also be,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And often that concern comes from hearing from them.
Yeah.
I mean, almost
Yeah,
always. Right. Exactly.
And that's essentially what we do.
Okay.
Like that's the path that we take, it seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah. The question I had was the sometimes the motions feel a little too complex for me. I know that sounds a little weird, but so for example, the example that I have is in a previous meeting, and I wanted to say no on just one part of the motion, and I didn't know how to do that. And so, so like the framework of how to, if a motion's been sent, been put on the table, and I want to break it apart, do I do that before it's seconded? What if it's seconded too quickly? Then am I able to then say, wait a second, I would like to pull this part of the motion?
That's
Okay.
amended.
and you'd ask
Yeah.
for it to be pulled into 2 parts or 3 parts. or whatever.
Okay.
I
Okay.
remember that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
were like,
Yeah.
Wait, what do I do?
Yeah.
And so having some direction, some guide, because for me as a new board member, I mean, it was something that was to me, but I just didn't know, you know, you're in the meeting and you don't necessarily know how to react or what to do. And so,
We should probably include in a norm, maybe not stated, but maybe stated that, you know, you're allowed to say, wait, stop.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can ask for a point of order about exactly what you said. If you
Right.
don't know what's next, I don't
Right.
convey what you want to achieve, and we'll help you because
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And absolutely, you can even just be, excuse me, I have a question, a point of order here. I'm suggesting we tease these 2 things out, and you can turn to board president, turn to your superintendent, and they'll assist you with that. Okay. Okay, very good. That's good. We'll make sure the committee knows all of that. Some language here on voting no or abstaining. I want to get into the desired outcomes you had, so I'm going to move through these items fairly quickly. You didn't really speak about the items that are on page 6 of 8, other than I did notice in the sample in front of you, it says in a workshop, the governance team will evaluate its effectiveness here, and in your bylaws, it says you may. So you're giving yourself in language an out. If you want to commit, it would be a modification to your bylaw, but I don't know if you want to commit to once a year meeting and reflecting on your work together as a team. That's up to you.
If I can suggest, I think one of the things that becomes critical for us to do is when we do have new board members.
Yes.
Because what I found in my working environment, you know, every time a single person changes, the dynamics of that group change.
Yes.
And so whether it's new superintendent, and we have a new superintendent, 2 new board members, we've had a significant shift. And so I think it's important at that time to have this type of review to make sure that everyone first is grounded, but also has a common grounding on what the procedures are. So there's no sense of, okay, I have information you don't have.
Right.
Carolyn, if I could just for a second go back to 5 of 8.
Sure.
Just because there's 2 things that we're doing that don't align with kind of the language from another district.
Sure.
And simply put, we sort of landed for this year, and we're going to see how it goes. Because the role of the supervisor in ed services, who is connected to our 36 sites, is so important, And because even when I'm going to school, I go through the supervisor as well, because I want not to confuse the schools because I'm not their supervisor, that we've kind of agreed as a group, me and the board members, that yes, it's important for you to connect schools and that the place to go is the supervisor, not me, not Cindy. We've got the list. Go to the supervisor's office, say, I'd really like to get to these 3 schools next week or the week after. Can we arrange it? And that's how we're doing that. And the only other thing, which is very small, because we have a small but mighty communications team, all of our board highlights don't come from my office, even though communications is in my office. It actually comes from our comms team, but I just wanted to offer that for the small group. But that's how we do things here.
And can I just, I guess, clarify or suggest that when we do reach out to someone other than you, for the school supervisor, that we CC Cindy, just so she has as our essential, I mean, I don't want to say admin, but our assistant, that she has eyes on everything in case something comes up that we need to be aware of.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Just remember, when you're visiting sites, you want to stay away from evaluative comments. It's hard because we love the teachers and we love what we see going on out there, but we really need to be careful with that and follow all the protocols. They're your policies. So if there are badges and sign-ins and masks, then we are committing to follow all of those. And I know this is a great team, and you're all looking at me like, of course, but the team can change. And so let's memorialize best practice.
So this may be a naive question, but so if I meet a teacher and I say you're doing great work, that would be an evaluative question?
I'll turn to Namita.
No, I think that is fine.
I
Yeah,
No, I
no.
think you should clarify.
I think if you get into, I'm hearing a lot of parent complaints that students are not on task and you're spending 50% of your time not doing this. That's what we're talking about.
And
But
then
I think
stopping by the
complimenting.
principal's office and making commentary would also be crossing that line, because they're there about it.
Shortly after I was elected, this will probably make our friend at the back of the room, Danny Hillman, cringe, but shortly after I was elected and I was visiting school sites, they said, you don't want to give any direction to anyone on staff. It doesn't really matter what you see. You just don't want to. I said, okay. But we had just had an earthquake like a couple weeks ago. And so as I was walking through that campus, I'm like, that TV isn't mounted. That computer isn't mounted. I'm like, and so I'm like, I had this little tablet and I'm writing these things down. And I called the superintendent and he said, you could speak with Danny Hillman. And so the poor Danny took a call, but I didn't say anything to any maintenance staff while I was there. But I did, I see a couple TVs up high on. I was so nervous. I was such a nervous mother. So anyway, I digress. Sorry. Okay. Moving through, that's a very good question. Thank you for that. We went through self-monitoring, norms. So here are some of the themes you wanted to talk about that I don't see in here. And I want to give you plenty of time to talk about them. Email, officers, trustee onboarding, and committees. So let me suggest that in addition to putting this governance handbook together, which would be very helpful for trustee onboarding, we're also talking annually and reliably after an election or any change, we would meet to review these protocols and to talk. I heard you say that, Ken, so I think everyone agrees with that. Is there anything else with regard to onboarding that you would want to maybe specify in here as a group?
Just from my experience, I'm just going to be honest. It felt very isolating being a new trustee. I know COVID was a big part of that. It was a huge part of that. And I don't know if this is appropriate at all, but having a senior, current trustee to kind of be a mentor, maybe in that month prior to being sworn in, and then the next. So you're assigned someone so that you feel, a little more comfortable in reaching out specifically to someone when you don't necessarily know the rules about who you can reach out to and who you can talk to. I don't know if that's appropriate or legal, but
I think it's a neat idea, and I think we should consider some of the timing aspects, because the election happens in early November. Some election results are very clear because of the need.
Example of that.
Sometimes they're not. And I remember particularly in, your cycle, the timing of the election certification is like a gap. And then we have our organizing meeting, like maybe the next week. It makes you wonder if maybe the organizing meeting should be in January. The new board's seated in December, but maybe there's onboarding time in that month rather than assuming it can happen in November, because you might not really know the result of the election until, and so we might want to make the time where we work out all those liaisons and all that, the January meeting, to give you that time.
Well, and also I think with that timing,
Give us, whoever.
yeah, with that timing for the, because we attend the school board association conference or whatever, and that happens early December, right, every year. And that's when there's a new trustee orientation, and I find that's very helpful too.
Right.
You know,
It's almost
kind of
like you should
onboarding.
make the reservation for new trustee unnamed. Candidates know it's coming and can hold it on their calendars, or something like that. Obviously, that they go, but setting them up for all that, because you won tomorrow, you need to go here.
Yeah, you don't
Yeah,
know what to,
Or
yeah.
last week you should have been there.
Right. Or in your first meeting, you're being appointed to something like the county something, and you're like, all right, I remember. I do, we can articulate some stuff. I think the value in a newer trustee and a veteran trustee working on this. In some districts, even brought the newer trustees in and walked through. Literally, you'll be seated here. Here's how you turn on. I mean, it's all so new. Here's the packet. Has how you read. Closed session is this. Consent agenda works like this. And it all sounds so easy until you're up there. And now we're on camera, so you want to participate. You want to do your job. So I think we can articulate some very concrete things we could take to really help mentor the newer trustees.
And if you can actually also add, something, if the ad hoc committee can add something. I mean, most of this will apply to whether appointed or elected. But I remember with mine, I started as an appointed trustee, and I had great help from like Cindy and people in the district, and then and I reach out to one board member or something just to clarify stuff. But I remember going through the new trustee orientation, and half of that is already kind of been addressed because I had to learn.
Already done, right.
Well, I had to learn like on the job training type thing. But there were questions, what to ask.
The thing, if I
No, I wanted to hear what Shelley has to say, because she also is relatively new.
I kind of mirror this, Laura. The training that we got through the CSBA was really good, but the specifics of this job in our district is what I needed to know. And Laura and I got together and compiled a big list, like she said, and sent it to Cindy, and she was great and got back to us with all the information. The problem is I don't know what I don't know. And I found out as soon as I got here, as many board meetings as I went to in the time that my kids were in school and I was involved, which were a lot, and all committees and all of the places I was present in and all the things I knew about school sites, I found out how much I didn't know. And it's very daunting and I think in this district, we haven't had new trustees in a long, long time. So we haven't really been in the practice of how to prepare properly when someone new walks through and what kind of tools are going to give them so they can. I think having a mentor would have meant a lot to me. And as a new board member, I felt it's serious, so not as I would be leading a PTA meeting. So having that would have been very, very helpful. So I think these things are important. If we had a binder, if we have a governance handbook that we're doing now, it's all going to help. But there's nothing like the experience that those of you, especially and Rachel, bring to this table. So we really need you to be there to mentor us because there's for us to learn.
You want to hit the ground running. You feel like you've been elected and you feel this.
Too,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
if I had said I was like trained to influence you, right? So having a process
Yeah.
basically says this is okay. We want you to.
We want you to we want you to say, wait a minute, I have a question. Let's extrapolate from that and talk about what, not right now, but in ad hoc, what would apply as well to the student,
And if,
right? And be respectful of our student voice at the dais and really work to make sure we can work with you to make sure you're comfortable with all of this for who will succeed you.
before we, because I think that's an important piece, I want to offer two thoughts very quickly. In the world of education, we have learned that the greatest learning is job embedded learning, defined as, you don't know until you're in the middle of something and you don't have a clue what to do next. And then you simply ask. And that's where the whole mentorship role comes into play. For our student trustee, it happens to be Ronit now. That's why the structure of 2 staff members supporting this work and whoever comes after, we're going to develop those processes as we go. Cindy kind of looks after the governance side with Ronit, and John Campopiano looks at the kind of how do we support your work with students. Similarly, the job embedded piece is key. I know that last year didn't allow us to do this. Trusting we're going to get to easier times soon, but the gift you gave us last year by adding additional supports in the superintendent's office is going to hopefully allow Cindy to do 2 things that have not existed. She's always done great work in getting ready for board meetings because that's obviously key. But the role of policy review, as well as the ability to be a liaison that allows me to assist you, help, but again, you don't have to wait for me. Cindy knows a ton of everything. And allowing us to take insights like this so that we are creating a whole orientation process, for example, a binder with important information. So all the weeds, give it to us, and then we'll work through how to get you what it is that you're asking for. And then to you, Ronit, but to all student trustees who come after, we're going to take this year, you're going to be our assistants. We're just going to build it as we go, based upon what we learn. And so as long as the ad hoc committee gives us a little room to do that, so that our students are actually forming that part, and I would suggest, having done this before, that it's going to take us a whole cycle for you and our students to say, let's do this, let's try this, let's see how this works. So to make as a commitment that our student side, our very important board member, that we have that solidified kind of by the end of this year, if that's okay to give us some room to move. Because if not, I don't want to put you in a very awkward spot of having to represent when you haven't actually had the time to engage and to get the wisdom that comes from lots of students that comes back to this board through you. So does that work for you, Ronit? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about that. I think that starting off, I was a little bit confused about the procedures of how I would kind of advocate for anything, or even just with all of this stuff like governance related, how I would, for example, add an item if there's some pressing concern, how I could get an idea to the members of the board, to the superintendent. So I do think that developing that process entirely and a lot of this as the foundational like element for all of it is going to be super useful. As it goes on, obviously, this is the first year that we have a student trustee in the San Ramon Valley Unified School District. So I do think really solidifying that as I go is going to be vital for future trustees and for my work that I do. But I am in complete agreement with what you had to say.
It's exciting work, so we're all committed to doing it together.
I think the aspect is, kind of rule of thumb is for trustees, it's almost a 2-year process to come on board because you have to go through, as John just mentioned, there's a cycle, and the ed code in California is just crazy too. One aspect that I think was mentioned here that I wanted to bring up because we've done it different ways is we have a seating approach, and I think the question asked about that earlier. And, you know, newest people at one end of the table, presidents at the other end next to the superintendent. One of the processes we've used almost forever seems to be, well, as we start discussing, we start at that end of the table and everyone gets their chance. I kind of broke that at one point because when I was sitting at that end of the table, just given my nature of being more of an internal processor, I like to hear from other people before I state my opinion. So when it was pointed at me, I said, no, I'll pass, but I want to come back. And I think with Susanna, we've moved more to the, you know, wants to say something, as opposed to having to go, you know, that more structured route. And that's the way it's stated here. And personally, I prefer that method of hearing who has something to say, and then everyone else can say their piece or react to it for that conversation to organically.
Yeah, I just remember being a new board member trying to learn everything on procedures. And then, of course, usually, you know, and the first comments, the president was like, you know, asking me, I'm like, I don't know. I really don't.
And then
Like-
once the seats change, now the, you know,
Yeah.
experienced
Right,
person is there and you can, okay, breathe. But yeah, it's silly. And,
It is.
and also the idea that you had to come up with all your comments and questions all at one time, when in reality, you should
It's-
be
Yeah, exactly.
reacting to each other's.
Absolutely. And listen, you know this because before you were board members, you weren't board members, right? And we want to hear that conversation. I want to hear you challenge each other. I want to know that I want people to say, that is not how everyone feels out there. And we need to know that there's a place for this voice. We want that discussion up there, absolutely. And that doesn't happen if you just go down the line, and it certainly is less likely to happen when you begin with the newest person on the board who says, there's a comma splice on the second page in the third paragraph. Thank you. And you sure look swell and blue.
I also think it's important when we are having discussions to really go with that flow of mixing it up
Mhm.
and not like asking your 5 things, sort of asking 1 or 2 and then giving someone a chance. And then I remember Mark used to be really good. I have more, but you know, I want to hear what the rest of you say.
Yeah.
And,
Making room for everyone.
because
Yeah.
otherwise sometimes it's so long till you get your turn, you don't even remember what you wanted to ask, or now it seems kind of.
And remember, you want to wrap this up with whether you're giving superintendent and staff direction to study something or action, right? What and why? What and why? So in summary, what I hear, and if you need help with this, Susanna, you want to turn to the superintendent. If you want to do it on your own for the next president. Okay, so what I'm hearing from this board is we want to move into committee the discussion about our obligation to return tests to parents, specifically at the secondary level, but not exclusively. Why? We're hearing from parents that they don't understand why X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z. Superintendent, is that clear direction for you? Can you take that back to staff? Because what happens is, and I learned this after I left the board, staff says, okay, we know what they want. Why? And the why are those, guidelines in terms of what you want to accomplish. So get to the why, what and why. And if after all that deliberation, liberate your superintendent to say, okay, I heard 5 points of view, and right. And so, because you are 5 people, but you are one boss, right? So we have to land on what and why. So listen for that, board president.
And just know that I'm not sure when I'm not clear.
Oh,
Yeah, and I think John does a good job of kind of summarizing the
Clarify.
conversation and
Yes.
kind of,
Yeah.
this is what I'm hearing, this is what I'm hearing, the direction, please tell me if that's correct.
yeah. And
Mhm.
equally, don't be shy. If you're, and equally, I know John would want me to articulate. If he summarized it and you say, wait a minute, I didn't hear. Yes, okay, very good. All right. So I know he's averting eye contact. Okay, you have a couple of other things you really, laughter, uproarious laughter at your expense, sir. Email. Let's talk about email and committees. The other thing on your list was officers, but that is in your bylaws. We can come to that. But I think there are a lot of questions around email committees. And I also want to talk about social media and advocacy, your role in advocacy, because I think there's room to build a plan for that. So email.
Can I just start with telling you what I do, because I, again, I don't know if it's correct, and it's just feedback that I've gotten from stakeholders. So if there's an email that comes to the whole board and John, I don't respond. If there's an email that comes to the 5, I don't respond. I do respond if someone who I know personally, and I'll just respond to them and let them acknowledge, type of thing. I don't know if but that's what I do just because it makes me comfortable. When I get an email to myself, even if it's a form email, and perhaps I can assume that others, I respond and let them acknowledge that, that I received it and tell them I hear, respond. With public comment, when we get emails that go through public comment, I send a response to all of them, just saying, thank you. I received your public comment. Thank you for sending it. I might put in a sentence specific to, I hear or thank you for sharing your perspective on, testing, whatever, so just so that they know that I'm actually reading their letter and I'm not copying and pasting the response. I do that because I had gotten some feedback from holders of feeling like they just wanted someone to acknowledge that they wanted me to acknowledge that I saw it, because it is a public comment, and because they're sending it and I'm not sitting in front of them hearing it, listening to the comment. So that's what I do. I don't.
To the entire board, the president responds. If you know a person, that's what I've took notes on what you said, just from to start from, and if they're public comments. So I'd have a discussion with the Board of Education and the lawyer, keep a close eye on what's because obviously what we want to do is be responsive, be respectful, and not violate the Brown Act.
The only thing that's a little different is sometimes, and I am on it, but they clearly are asking for the board. So sometimes it might have my name. When I read it and say, that isn't me, I'll send a note to Susanna and say, what do you think? I think this is more you. So the only caveat is sometimes when I'm on it, but if direct email, I'll say, what do you think? And Susanna says, I'll take that one. And of course, we do that. I just wanted to clarify that sometimes it's a little different when it comes to both me and all of you.
No, but if it's a direct request or really wanting a board voice, then yes, then I'm going to respond, even though to all of us and John.
So I think one of the challenges is, and the feedback that I've gotten about this practice, is that the public doesn't really understand that. And I know Susanna's really good about putting in her emails when she responds that it's the protocol of the board. And I noticed in one of the last ones that she also added, please be assured that all board members even read all the emails that we get, even though I'm responding. I think that's been a real confusing thing for the public. And if there's some way that we could put those protocols out there so people can understand that we're not ignoring them, or we don't not want to hear from them, but we're not want to be duplicitous in the way that we handle our board business. Because if all of us were responding to every email that came in, that's where we'd be spending all of the time. And that's not what we're here to do. While we want to be responsive to the public.
We also don't want to violate the Brown Act. And, the more they get you involved in email, there could be.
Right. Yeah, and I think the intention of having the board member reply on behalf of all of us per board protocol was so that it was one voice. So I would say, if it's someone, we can debate this. If I would say you're overdoing that. If she's responding on all of us, for all of us, she needs to be responding for all of us. It could be, we could entertain if it is someone that after she responds to all of us, maybe you could say something, but it might even be better if you don't, because then it becomes that we all need to do the same thing. And so the whole point of this was to Shelley's point, take some of that.
So a public comment email, excuse me, public comment is, please be assured the entire board has received your email. I want to offer you that assurance. I know my trustees review all of these email comments. Thank you so much for sharing your voice. And I'm responding on behalf, as president, responding on behalf of the Board of Education. We can also articulate that in the place where people submit. John, we can kind of make
And
that
I think
process
on the
clearer.
public comment one, it's even more important because those are equal to a yellow card,
Mhm.
and we're not responding to the yellow cards. I mean, that's just
Right.
my perspective, but I think
Nice. Okay.
just differentiating the emails that come in between meetings and the public ones, we should parse that out, but I think we need to be consistent. Or we end up with a dynamic, oh, Laura Bratt's the only board member who cares, and that's not good for her.
Yeah, and I would love for there to be that communication to stakeholders that that's what we're doing, so that it isn't that assumption and guesswork that happens.
Okay.
If I may, though,
appreciate what you're saying, and it's, you've got to be very careful that it really is the way that you mention respond, acknowledging receipt, but not stating opinion back, because that's when it could get into serial voting if more than one or two of us were to.
and if I can add, I think just to clarify, we're talking about two different things.
Mhm.
That which is the many emails we receive, I have less of a concern around an acknowledgement of receipt, but I hear what Rachel's saying, that it can set you all up of who's doing what and why aren't you doing it. That's why it's there. The public comment piece, different story in my perspective, in that, one, it is a part of the record. Two, it does state that you're all reading it when it's submitted. Three, the president's script, if it doesn't, should include, but I think it does, that it's all part of the process. I know that, Ronit, I was able to give a quick wink, and then I was able to have a bit of a conversation with you after the last meeting, because there's a reason why the board and I does not get into a back and forth with public comment that I don't believe our community fully understands. I think there's an expectation that we engage that way. And when you don't engage that way, or when I don't engage that way, it could emotions to emerge. So I think clarifying the board's meeting, the board's business, informed by the public, interested voice of the public, but it's actually not the forum where that reciprocal dialogue happens. Now, can we strengthen, which is probably your next chapter around how we do advocacy work and engagement work, can we strengthen reciprocal dialogue processes? Of course, but that's not necessarily the board meeting. And so I think some clarifications around that in the way we communicate with our community, especially since we're putting out some highlights from this discussion, might be important.
Right, absolutely. But before I ran for the board, I covered education for the local paper, and I sat in board meetings at the back of the room where we see Terry Keeney, and parents speak and address the board, and they really, because we offered this sort of legalese response to why we weren't responding to them, they'd leave and say, why, like they're used to PTA meetings or school site meetings or meetings at church or groups where you speak up and they talk to you. And I think just very simple language that we are obligated to the agenda. It informs people what we're discussing. If we engage in this discussion with you right now, we would be denying people who are equally interested in that discussion. So please do not be offended. You're here because you care. She had some questions. Could you follow up with her tomorrow? She seemed very concerned. You can always direct staff to address them if that's necessary. I've even seen, depending on what the public presents to you, I've seen staff members go give their business card to them and say, call me tomorrow, because some things are very emotional and require immediate attention of staff, but just in a friendly, consumer-friendly language saying, I know you're here because you care. We just cannot engage in this. Please don't misunderstand it.
Because we
They
legally
don't.
cannot.
Legally, you cannot. I just was stunned by it every time these meetings where parents spoke and they'd leave, and I think, man, they really didn't get that at all. They just felt shut down, and so we can work. Okay, you're welcome. And
I
think
just
it's-
add something, Cheryl?
you know what, Namita, you can add too.
Okay, thank you for your generosity. So I just want to remind everyone that any email that you have is subject to the Public Records Act. And so BCCing someone, all is discoverable. And so just please be mindful of that. You already know it. It's just my job to remind you of
I think you also want to be very careful with electronic and device and when you are in board meetings, because all of your discussion should be with everybody. So that's just something I share with everyone, not anyone here in particular. Okay, committees. John, I'm going to turn to you and ask what questions we need addressed to clarify which we.
Sorry, that should we address, or will social media be
Yes.
part of the
You want to
committee?
talk about social media right now, Susanna? And then
Yeah.
go to committees?
Right, because I thought we were doing communication, right, emails and all that stuff.
Okay, sure. I thank you for that. Okay, so I'm not sure who here is using social media as an elected official. It's your privilege to use it, but there are some rules I think you need to be very mindful of, and I'll actually turn to Namita because there's some new law here. And as I turn it to Namita, I will just say the rule of the road is be very careful. Be very, very, very careful. That which we're discussing in social media, which might just seem like a general topic of interest, like back in the day, late start. Maybe we're just sharing comments on late start, articles of interest, and we're liking each other's posts and so forth. About 6 months later, it was actually going to be something legislated and put in front of us. And now, so my point is, if you might be talking about something that isn't officially in front of the board, that could in very short order be put in front of the board. So you want to be really careful with social media. And maybe if you could address that point, Anita.
Yes, happy to. The good example is that late start time, sharing of all these academic studies that talk about teenagers needing additional sleep, their circadian rhythm doesn't get going and all of that. And in the olden days, people would share those articles on, and it was predominantly Facebook. I mean, that was the primary social media platform. And there were, people not commenting. So when I say people, I'm talking about board members. So say to post an article and perhaps Ken liked it. He did not comment on it, but really it impacted school starts. Last year, there was a brand new bill that said you can't even like that particular post because that is sort of building concurrence. You are talking about something that falls within the purview of the board, and you are taking a position, or it appears that you're taking a position, but just that like button. So the upshot is you can have social media posts. I would refrain from commenting on each other's posts, and I don't mean comments like in just words, but also just the like buttons, heart buttons, whatever. I would not engage in that because that is considered taking a position. It's easier, I think, on Twitter because you really are either reading it or tweeting it back again, but it becomes more difficult on platforms like Facebook because people are on Facebook, and there is a generational shift. People like Facebook better in terms of usage, and that's what traditionally is used by a lot of school board members. So the actual bill talked about the like button, so it's written specifically with the Facebook model in mind. So my caveat is you are going to see a lot of posts on social media. I would refrain from liking things or commenting on things that fall within the purview of your decision making as a school board.
So if the post is an invitation to a meeting that's education related.
That is different. You're not talking about,
So
you're not talking,
pushing an issue.
It's-
just sharing an invitation.
exactly. It's no different than all of you meeting and saying, okay, Saturday for a special board meeting works. You're not talking substantively about taking a position. It's merely the mechanics of coming together for a meeting. So liking a fundraiser, that's fine. But if you're talking about things that are substantively impactful, whether it's ADA, whether it's what kind of hold harmless language will the governor provide for districts, should there be fires this season, all of that kind of substantive decision making, you should refrain from engaging and liking. That is not to say that you cannot have a personal presence on social media. I would encourage you to have two different profiles. That's the cleanest way. Namita Brown, the board member, Namita Brown, the mother. Two different. And-
Bearing in mind that you're always trustees.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean,
You just
there
always-
is intersectionality because anybody who gets a handle or a copy or a screenshot of whatever you have put out there will use that to their advantage or their purpose. But I do think that there is some value if you are going to be um, a social media user, which you have to be in today's world. Just be cognizant that you want to have a personal profile and you want to have a professional profile.
You can answer questions, you can push information. You probably don't want to use social media to debate difficult topics. I agree with Willie Brown. Nobody ever won an important argument in 132 characters. These are important subjects. If you see something in social media that you feel that the district should be aware of, then I would alert Cindy and certainly the team, which is social media is monitored very closely for you. In the interest of informing the district's work. It's a good way to keep a finger on a pulse of the organization. It's not perceived as anything negative. It's really, John has made abundantly clear, we listen to all voices. The board wants to hear everyone, and so they watch it for that reason. But I would just be careful that you use it for productive reasons, and I think you probably all will. It's good to articulate that, though, if that's your shared practice. Yeah, there's.
And actually, you can use the district's social media account as the source on your social media account. So the link up between the district's presence on social media is the best way to communicate so that.
Laura shares the district's post, and I see it via Laura before I see it via the district. There's no harm in you like.
I would not like it. I'm sorry.
So basically, just don't like Laura's
Don't like
stuff.
any.
My question then is if
Not like it.
if Rachel posts a picture about visiting Cal, can I like that?
Yeah, I don't see that to be an issue. It's not a policy decision that you're going to be entertaining. But if, and I'm just going to make up this example, if in your trustee area you're trying to build a new school that is there is some discussion around the amount of money to take away from the general fund, liking or disliking that may be viewed as taking a position on the budget piece. So you just got to be very thoughtful about it.
Very thoughtful, and even liking fundraiser for band. If you're going into budget cut discussions and band is on that list, you signal to me that you're going to protect band. So I just think you need to be very mindful of, social media can be misunderstood. It lacks a tone of voice and context, and so it's powerful, but it's not always optimal. And that brings us to advocacy and getting you out there.
Can I ask?
And I
Work committee.
guess see the links too. If you like someone's stuff, their stuff is going to show up in your feed. You don't like it, it's not, and therefore you're not going to be influenced by your fellow board participants.
Yeah.
I do want to clarify though, because likes, right? Facebook, as Namita had said, that they've even written, right, legislative stuff around really the likes of Facebook. But Twitter, there is also a little heart that you can like. So, like, I just want to make sure that we're talking about all
You're right.
social media
Yes.
channels and
Yes.
not just Facebook, right?
Correct. Good clarification, and that is exactly the position.
And then I do have two specific questions about social media before we move to advocacy.
Sure.
So if I do have a trustee Brat handle, separate account, and if I post, let's say I post a picture of visiting Cal and someone starts to make a comment that is policy issue that has nothing to do with the picture, but maybe they see kids are standing really close together outside without masks. And so then they start a conversation and then there's a debate on my thread. What would I do?
You can thank people for their comments and not take a position. You can also do comments on your thread, although that is not probably going to be a good thing for you. But I would just say I'm not going to debate this particular issue, and this is not a forum for it.
And they cannot close off their account to anyone, correct?
Oh, as a trustee, yes, you cannot select that I'm only going to have Carolyn and not.
And I should never delete a comment. even if it's incendiary or
I would just turn off the comments and take all the comments off rather than taking a comment off.
and then just another kind of thing that happens in social media is that I at times occasionally get messages
Mhm.
through Facebook Messenger, Instagram Messenger, whatever it's called on Instagram. And I treat that like an email. Like
Perfect.
Okay.
That is perfect. But now I am curious. I'm going to go check your handle and see what the social media presence is.
And have they opened a forum
I'm sorry, Taryn, what?
by offering a certain post? Have they created a forum?
So the forum is individual. It's Lauren Bratt as a sole board member. It is not a district forum. So that is the difference.
Okay.
If now we're talking about the district's social media account, by picking and choosing comments that you want to turn off based upon the content, then you're engaging in content-based regulation, and that would be problematic. So
Just to make sure everybody understands that, right? Because districts have before not here posted something that's sort of positional, and they've opened it up to the other when we're advocating for a bond. Both points of view. Before we shift to advocacy, I just wanted to touch on committees, Dr. Ray, and make sure that we're clear on committees and committee assignments. And we have several types of committees. We have established board committees, and that would be bond and parcel tax and anything else you create. Then there can be superintendent committees, and those are not subject to the Brown Act. Those are not necessarily involving board members. You can have ad hoc committees, which are going to have to review this and so forth. We'd start with the board established and other committees and let you drive this conversation for board sponsor.
Thanks. And I'll say with humor, because I saw it in the package, that if we're ever at a meeting where we're all going by first names, John works for me too. I don't need the title, just because I'm conscious of the fact that I feel like we're talking about someone who's a lot older than I am. And I'm the only one that's using a title. In terms of committees, one of the things that I just wanted to put on the table, clearly when it's the statutory committees, we're very clear about what to do. When it's a superintendent that you are all very much a part of, what I mean by that is the purpose of that committee is part of that feedback loop that allows me to get information back to you in this forum at a board meeting. Then that's where we have the tradition that no more than two of you need to be there. I think it's great, and I'm glad that that is very much what we do. Where as a newer superintendent, trying to get my head around other types of involvements, that's where I just have some questions in the following ways. So one, whenever you or I, and I'm going to put me in it though for different reasons, are in various committees, no matter how friendly, hospitable, warm, and engaging we are, we hold a role. And that role means that it has an impact. So I'm very cognizant of the fact that, I'll use an example. We're going to be working with Ronit on what's an appropriate way for us to be present to the Senate. Well, we've already got a little bit of precedent. We've learned that as long as you're not making decisions, nor am I necessarily trying to influence a decision, we on occasion will sit with students. We do that with the GSA forum, for example, periodically, just to listen. Not to engage, not to discuss, but to listen. And so I'm going to be working with Ron and the Senate to figure that out, because that's a question that has come to me recently, and it's a great question. But where it gets a little foggier for me is when we might have staff committees that don't involve our public at all. And one of you might request to be on it. Or historically, there have been committees where you might be present, and then others who are asking how you could have access to that. And again, I have to go and get the history on. There was a good reason at one time why that decision was made. Whether it still stands or not, I simply, as again, your newer superintendent, was like, I don't exactly know how to approach that, just because I don't see the procedure or the process that governs that. So it kind of made me simply say, I got to ask you, because again, statutory committees, clear. Superintendent committees that are agreed to in essence by you, because I always bring it to you, very clear. Subcommittees that involve the community, as long as it's not more than 2 of you, I'm pretty good with, because I think it's always good for you to be present, realizing that you and I have a role that impacts. But the last one that's a grayer area is when it just may be historical that 1 or 2 of you are somewhere, and that then it opens the door, especially, again, I'm going to be direct with new trustees saying, could I have access to X, Y, and Z? And I'm not exactly sure what that means, how we would do that. And again, if I can push it a little bit, based upon what I just said regarding our roles and positions, if it's even appropriate. My last comment, which is why I think it's so good to have this discussion. Tara Lynn has mentioned about 5 or 6 times in this meeting that, you are an elected body, and the democratic process determines who is going to be here. And when we have good process and procedure, no matter who's sitting at this dais, we can be healthy. Without around some of these dynamics change and the democratic process brings into this room who comes in, it is not usually the best time to try to, at the beginning of a mandate, try to work through some of these pieces. And I have learned, because I'm not new at this, that it puts me in a particular way in a very vulnerable spot, because I then have to start figuring out how to drive this without the procedural pieces. And then it looks like I then am making decisions that put me, if I'm working with a new board, in a very precarious spot. And I don't ever to do that. So that's kind of why it's important for me that we kind of talk this through now.
So let me just start with the easy stuff, and then we'll move into some of the stuff that's just going to need, it's not difficult, it's just going to require more like collaboration and problem solving. These statutory committees, bond oversight, parcel tax, and any established board committee you might choose to put in place, what is the agreed to process by which you determine which trustee on that?
And we actually do it in a bigger picture though. We have this list. Some of them are board committees like the 2 you mentioned. Many of them are liaisons to standing committees.
Okay.
We used to have.
Is that at a board
now
meeting,
it's-
Rachel?
Yeah, that usually
Okay.
gets done at that December meeting.
December
This
meeting.
time it
Okay.
got pushed off
Thank
to
you.
January.
Okay.
But in relation to what John was getting at, the district formed a homework policy committee, to use one that Shelley had referred to where she was a community member. Person who was in Christine's position put out in probably the Friday update, hey, we're forming this committee. We'd like to have up to 2 board liaisons. If you're interested. In those days, it would often be only 1 or 2 people would be interested, and it would be easier. Now that we have, really 5 hands-on board members, we're going to with times where 3 or 4 want to do it. So I think what we do is figure out how that process gets picked, and it kind of seems like we should look at how many people have, and if someone already has a lot, then common sense would be sorry it needs to go to someone else, or take some that are already existing, like grade reform. That's been in existence for 2 years. I've been the liaison on it, but if there were 1 or 2 other people really wanted to do it, they could surface that. Maybe we'd want the rule to be the person who's already there needs to give it, has the choice to give it up, but some kind of process for saying, hey, I'd like to do that. Can we share the wealth?
LCAP too, right?
And
LCAP, because it's a
And there's
committee,
the
and there's
PTA
at least 3 of us.
liaison and the ledge
Right,
committee.
yeah.
So there's that whole long list, and we call
Yeah.
them liaisons because they're not public.
And as a rule of thumb that I'm working from, but I respect my understanding, anytime our community is present at a committee, I personally believe you being present in a liaison role, realizing again, and I have to watch myself too, it's in a connecting, listening capacity because you don't have authority as a board member. And again, you're all very, very, because I've been there, you're very good at this, explaining, kind of what your role is and what your role isn't in that space. But anytime our public is in a committee, your presence there in the appropriate way is a good rule of thumb. Working out how to ensure access when someone you might have always enjoyed X and someone wishes to participate, if it happens in December, that usually is when it goes on, it's easy because we just talk it through. But when it can't wait till December, or, December just happened 2 months ago, the strategy we've used, Teralyn, is to Rachel's point, the Friday update, I invite people to let me know of their interest. I kind of look with Cindy's help at who's doing what. And then and again, it's worked, but I'm not sure it would work with every board in the future. It has worked that I just say, well, you know what? Shelley hasn't had as many opportunities yet. So Ken, do you mind stepping back? Is working right now. But it is not a structure that I think could work in every situation, if that makes sense.
Well, and then if it really comes down to that it doesn't just happen, oh, sure, no problem, then maybe it would need to come as a board meeting and we have 2 nominees for blah, 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 and then the 5 of us pick.
Yeah, or we,
One other thing I wanted to add, though, it came up in the grade reform committee meeting kind of early on that kind of stunned me, was they were shocked, the participants, which were all teaching staff and district management, that it meant, at least for stewardship, it meant a lot to the staff to know that a board member was supportive of change. It opened the doors for that. Wow, we really can have an authentic, look at this issue, because they were under the impression that they just say no to anything. And so, to me, that really showed value of having board members involved, because why are we having a meeting if we're just board's going to say no, right?
That's interesting, Rachel, because sometimes I feel like, if I'm sitting in a meeting, are some of the members hesitant to bring up all the, because I'm a board member. I mean, try not to,
I think part
disrupt
of
there.
it is being listening, like you said, but being supportive of the topic. Because if you were against grade reform, you're probably not the right liaison for that committee, right? And so part of it is, I think, helps with the communication of the work that we're doing, and that the board is supportive of the work. We wouldn't even have a committee if it wasn't.
And I think you've just outlined the piece I want to emphasize. The way I work, and I in no way critique anyone who's gone before in their style, is the existence of that committee is because you've already given a direction from a policy place. You'd like us to look at something.
Mhm.
So if that doesn't exist, then we're in essence operating outside of you, which I don't want ever to do. Or if we aren't operating within what you've already at a appropriate level agreed to, then I could be in a situation where I am being influenced by some of you to do work that the collective hasn't decided. So what's really important to me whenever we do have our committees, which is why through your direction we're reshaping some of them, is the community, our community already knows that you are supportive of this direction. The specificity of it has to be worked out. Anything that impacts policy, we've got to bring back into the public space, all that. So that support, if you will, is there. But Rachel's right. In the past, I've been taught, because I wasn't here, sometimes a staff committee or a staff generated might emerge without the board's explicit direction. And then that group feels a little bit more supported because at least one trustee is there. But again, we're back to, but as one trustee, you don't have any weight, and it could all be blown apart if it gets back into a board meeting and so forth. That's why this is such an important conversation to just clarify, because you get all the obvious reasons.
Don, did you also have some concern, because I'm just trying to understand, committees where a board member is only staff and not community?
So I make a distinction, but I think it's a little different than how you've lived historically, which is why I want to have this conversation. If any, and again, please know as I say this, I'm sharing with you experience that you can push back on. When staff is working on things, I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that you as people, I appreciate in a circle, because as people, you bring a rich wisdom. But you're a board member, and your presence in a staff working meeting, let's again say we can invite, who knows who's going to be around a dais 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and so forth. It could actually take our requirement, which is you've given me direction, expected to fulfill that direction. We need some thinking space to work through that strategically. We bring it back to you for your oversight. And one or two of you are with us in the designing. Well, why aren't all of you with us in the designing? But you can't be, because we got a Brown Act thing, because now we're in a board meeting. And for me, I don't mean to sound too inflexible, but it gets all dicey. And so for me, when it's a staff work group, putting together what needs to happen based upon your direction, then it's different for me than when we have other subgroups where our community is present, and the purpose really is to give us advice and insight. That's the purpose of some of our committees before we formulate what we're going to bring to you, which still happens in this room. So I see one different than the other, but my bigger worry is who gets to influence that design away from the rest of the body becomes my question in a staff work group.
Well,
If you're looking for in a tough work group where some people have indicated we really need board support, and others I do know, I'm not speaking the truth right now, because boss is boss here, because they don't see us as just an individual board member, as an authority, and that can happen. And we are right now talking about a board that's having a very healthy conversation. You are immensely collegial and professional, and we hope you always know that in San Ramon. Historically, you have known that in San Ramon, but there can be, people who come in with an intention to be much more disruptive. I think you want to memorialize really healthy habits now, for the sake and the health of the organization, not to contain or control anything, for the sake and the health of the organization. My suggestion would be that if there, for your consideration, there's a staff meeting, John, a staff committee meeting, only staff, let a board member join and say thank you. And this is the direction we've set, and we appreciate your being here, and then leave. It's a thought versus participating. I don't even know if you are participating in any of those. I don't know what the dynamic is, but you can set that tone of, we really appreciate the work that you're doing here in the looping committee, 4th to 5th grade looping. I'll pick another innocent one. And the board is very committed to student health and connection to staff. And we see this discussion you're having as part of that. And I'm just here to say on behalf of the board, thank you for your hard work, and then maybe not participate. Would that work for you, John?
Well, I just don't know if that's a good use of the board members' time, because again, I think that's understood in the way in which we're structured now, because we don't start any of our meetings any longer without saying, as you're aware, the board gave us direction and what we're working towards and what we plan back is. That is you can fill in all those statements. That's the framework that we do our work now. So again, I always appreciate the affirmation that this body provides when affirmation is due. That is something that is really, we're grateful for. Whether that's needed or not is another story. But again, I just think that the reason I'm raising, because I know I'm being asked by some of you, could I be at? And I'm feeling awkward when I say, I'm not so sure that that's appropriate. But I also know that historically that has sometimes been the case. And I don't want to step on toes, but I also know that without the clarity, I don't want to be picking and choosing. So where I guess I'm putting on the table is where it's a staff-acted, staff-only work group that's intending to either do work for one of the committees that you're sitting on, because you're actually going to be in groups of 2 at some of the places where that work is going. But of course, it always comes back here, because part of what you're going to hear on the 14th, is that our next board meeting, 14th? Is the feedback loop. I really want to be sure that there's a clear feedback loop between every committee that gets back into this boardroom again. So through those annual speaking about.
So I definitely appreciate your need for clarity and guardrails here, and for being prepared for the future. I do want us to be careful, though, that if the reason a board member is on a staff committee is not really because they're a board member, but because they have expertise that is welcome at the committee, maybe that's handled as an exception because it is an anomaly or something. And maybe they're really they're just there as a community member. Although you never put your hat off, you wouldn't introduce yourself as I'm the board liaison. You would just say, I'm here as a community member because this issue is important to me. But those would be handled as exceptions. They wouldn't be board. I wouldn't want us to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. If it's expertise that's welcome to staff, not if you're in the way of staff.
So the thought on that front is your advice as individuals with experience and expertise is always welcome. I love when you share with us what you think we should consider without the weight of the board's direction, because that just makes us think. You do have a role, and I appreciate that. How we structure that becomes important, because with the greatest amount of respect, what happens if a board member feels they have an expertise that isn't aligned with what the board has directed us to do, and they're now sitting in a committee and we're managing that because we know that the board isn't in agreement with this particular perspective, and that expertise now becomes influence? All I can say is that it can place the superintendent in a significantly difficult spot if to be a body. Again, you do have diverse views. You do not always agree. I appreciate the respectful way in which you engage each other when that happens. But I got to put it out there. All you have to do is look around the state right now. That's not the case everywhere. And the person who has to navigate that is the superintendent. So where I'm going with this is, I always want to hear your expertise. Our team wants to hear your expertise. But when we get into the structure, you might be present formally, either as a citizen or as a trustee, even though you can't take your trustee off. It gets a little bit murkier if you happen to have a view that your other colleagues don't hold. That's where I'm saying it gets odd. Right now, let me be clear. I don't have any problems. But we're planning not necessarily for who's here at the moment. It's just that the world may change, and we simply have to have good, solid procedure to govern it. But I don't want you ever to think your expertise isn't necessary. It's just how we hear your expertise and how your expertise shapes us, which is important. And as elected board members, one could argue that your expertise would be best in this space when we're bringing insights to you regarding what we're thinking. And then you actually can influence each other with that expertise. And then we actually take it back and do something with it. And I'm feeling a little off because it's not personal to you as people here and now. It's more about healthy practice related to governance that I'm kind of asking.
Right. Well,
It was long, sorry.
and to add another layer to it, so just in experience, what I've experienced being on committees as a board liaison. So for example, the Culture and Climate Committee. So, I love it. It's work that I really find fulfilling, and it's work that I enjoy, but I'm working. I'm not just sitting and saying thanks and walking away, right?
Mhm.
So we break into subcommittees, and in my, community subcommittee, we brainstorm and we noodle and we come up with ideas and we do all this stuff. And it's like, it's work. Should I not be doing that? Is that okay? I know it's community, but it's actually a variety of stakeholders.
So again, my distinction is nothing happens at those committees involving community that doesn't come back through my team. And my team is responsible to bring things to you. So again, maybe you're going to tell me that this isn't appropriate, but I personally don't have an issue with it because we're still taking what we've learned as a staff who reports to you, me reporting to you, taking all that design ideas, taking all those creative suggestions, formulating it into a direction forward and bringing it to you formally. And that's where I don't have a problem. Whereas if you're sitting at the design committee, which is my staff group without your colleagues, then it's like, who's getting more influence? Because frankly, that's where the rubber's hitting the road.
Okay.
We listen to all this feedback. We don't ignore 1 ounce of it, but the rubber hits the road when we're sitting in a work group saying, at my staff table saying, what are we bringing forward to the trustees for their consideration? Or what is it we want to share with the community that will help us be better, because that's where we hope to get your feedback. So
Oh.
I'm sorry, I think.
Sorry. Had to- Since it is now after 12, I'd like to the motion up to extend our meeting so that we can continue our conversation.
On committees, and we wanted to get into advocacy, and I believe there's some comments. So I think we could wrap up by 12:30 easily if everyone's comfortable with that. I'd like you to be able to finish.
And we can take this, the ad hoc group,
Like
could
to
I?
finish, but I definitely have to be gone.
Okay, so 12,
So
what?
moved. Motion. Oh, there.
I'll second.
Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Can I just add one thing? I do a lot of governance work, and as I'm hearing you talk, pardon me for saying this, but I don't think, well, across California, there came a point where there was a distinction between administering and governing. And those changes came through CSBA in a big wave in the early 2010s. And as I'm hearing you talk, again, nobody, you don't have to listen to my opinion on it because it's not legal, but I'm telling you from practical perspective, it seems to me if you're talking about work groups, if you're talking about district employees working on a project together and a board member sitting in that room as part of the work design, it is very unusual. It's not part of the norm. It's not what happens in other places. And I suspect that shift happened in most places around 2010. And I don't know if it's a culture thing or nothing wrong with it, but I'm just pointing out that this is not the way most districts operate. There are going to be exceptions, like there are exceptions where I have board members who sit in on collective bargaining. That's a different animal. But if you're talking about straight up work group that is happening, what kind of elements to choose, what kind of to choose, rote administrative tasks that you're paying employees for, it's unusual to find board members at that level. So I'm just going to put that out there.
I find it interesting that I just recently came off a month-long jury duty assignment. And one of the issues when you're in jury is the judge makes it very clear that even if you are an expert, you can't bring your expertise into the deliberation room. You can only be upon, the witnesses and the testimony that you've heard in court. And it's almost the same type of a thing that we sit kind of in judgment of the workloads that staff brings forward to us. And we need to make sure that we've put our own responsibilities in the correct bucket as representatives of the community. I make it real clear to folks that I'm not here on this board as a professional educator. I've never been a professional educator, but my love of the area and the role that I believe I can play puts me in this seat. Otherwise, I would have tried to be on a school, work as a school staff member instead. So different roles. That's the way I would view it.
I think important designation also for our public to know, because I think a lot of people that I hear from in their communications treat my position as either being an administrator or an educator. And I have to make it clear to people that I am neither. I'm here to do the governance of the district, and I bring, of course, my own life, my experience with the school district into this position, but that's my function. And I think, again, there's a lot of confusion about that because people in the public, in the community, because we're the school board, they think that we're either administrators or educators, and that's not what we're here to do.
You are here to set direction, to put the structure in place. That's the superintendent and the structure for voices to be heard and included. Policy, which we're grateful Cindy's going to be paying close attention to with you. Fiduciaries, prioritize that money, recognize when excellent education costs this and budget's looking like this. What are we going to do about that? That's an important conversation. Setting direction for negotiations. We won't have a lot of time today, if any, to talk about what that looks like, but there are steps that they can walk you through when you get close to that stage. There are absolute steps we're involved in setting that direction. And you bring the voice of the public into the discussion, and you take the work of the district out to the public. And that's something I want to make sure. I want to make sure you get what you need on committees as a team, but I want to move into advocacy. This is a board boldly stepped into strategic directions when others were really just, when you could have been really focused on survival and COVID and reopening, but you reopened with a vision which is exciting. And what is our role in carrying that vision out and letting people know where and how to engage? So I don't want to lose that opportunity before we go, because that's an ad hoc committee as well. And I think that's going to be a very exciting place to work, sir.
Just a thought, because we've already asked the board about a workshop specific to resolutions, I'm also, because the world doesn't negotiate like we used to before, meaning we negotiate often now. It's not like there's a negotiation season. I really would appreciate, because I'd actually like to learn as well in our California context, because this is newer for me coming from another place. Why don't we schedule another workshop that doesn't only deal with resolutions, but also deals with how you give direction to the negotiation process that at this point is ongoing. We tend to negotiate without stopping now. Could we hold that to the next
Sure.
workshop and schedule another one? So then we go deeper on those
Deeper.
2 points that have come up, so we don't, because we won't be able to do that in 20
Yes.
minutes. Right.
No, you won't. And largely due to the, one, it's new for us as new trustees, but also the dynamic you just described.
It's different dynamic. It's not like we all negotiate at the same time and we get ready for the season and you give us direction and we move. It's now where we're sometimes negotiating every week. So maybe we can come back to that.
Yowza. So she said, in December, you look at committees as a whole, and there are some that are through the law, right? Parcel taxes, oversight, so forth. And you look at liaison roles, and it's probably a good idea for you to maintain that. If something comes up outside of the window of December, you would look at it. You're going to look at it. I heard here with thoughtful consideration to who's already on several committees, or even with consideration to who might be in that or excited by that particular role. That's where you want to be kind and flexible to each other. The people who never let go of technology because they work at Google, but others would like to be on that committee, I think we can articulate that you'll be collaborative and cooperative with one another. And what I am hearing, though, that I don't know if there's consensus among this board that you would not be participating in the staff work, the administrative work, but that's what I heard discussed, but I don't know if there's consensus on.
I think that the concerns expressed by John are valid, and as much experience as some board members bear on work of some of these committees, I think it would be a better boundary to not have board members sit in those meetings. I think we have enough ways to input what goes on in the district and in those particular committees. Maybe we have many different ways to do that, and maybe that one isn't an avenue that we choose to use right now.
Do we have a lot of those committees currently?
There are a number of staff committees that feed into the bigger committees. And again, in terms of do we have a lot of trustee involved in staff committees? No, but I also know, again, said with the amount of respect, there's been requests, and that's the reason why I'm having this conversation. And there's been some history that I don't want to be offside. So that would help us. But just know two things, if that's what your consensus is. Still want to hear your expertise. And you would still potentially the two trustees on the committee that it kind of feeds into. And ultimately, we will incorporate it all to our design. And you're going to hear about it formally when it comes to you as it needs to and must in this room. So there's still influence points. It's just clearing up a few things along the way so that we're not in a tough spot.
And I would like to clarify that you don't have to be onto a committee to ask questions of that.
Hmm.
Well, those committees are where they move, they churn, they work hard. But all board members can say, I would like the following. Who put that microphone there? I would like the following discussed in committee if possible. That's a great way to add expertise as well.
I had a quick question. So, in regards to me and my involvement with Student Senate, what does that mean? Does that mean I would have to be a little bit more disengaged and simply serve as a liaison? Or should I retain that level of involvement because it's in a different kind of...
So Student Senate is a very important and different conversation. And how you are emerging as a facilitator leader with others is off to a great start. You don't need to worry about that because we see you as a really significant position of reciprocity and dialogue. You're influencing this way, we're influencing that way, and student voice is paramount. So no, you're good, and just know that we're going to figure it all out this year, and we're going to make it really clear in June. But I think what you're doing is perfect, which is just so the whole board, Ron is a key person. And forgive me, there's also one or two other student leaders who work closely with you. Yes, one more, and her name is. Thank you. Just because I want to give credit where credit's due, and John Campopiano is also a support, and I think what you're doing is absolutely necessary. So I see that a little differently as long as the board is okay. What you just heard me say. Okay.
Yes.
So one of the things that you've got to be careful about, I'm going to say this in public because again, I've been around student board members almost my entire career. You can't be everywhere. So when a student is on LCAP, which we will have students on LCAP, it may be you, it may not be, they would play the same role as others. The only caveat to that is we adults tend to fill a room. So one of the things I've asked our team is to be sure that when students are in the space, there is space. And that takes functionality because some of yourselves have the confidence to speak up, and thank you. Others I've met along the way need a little bit of assistance for the door to be opened, and that's something that's very significant. So whether it's you or whether it's other student members, you would participate appropriately. Legal, but not really because your role is not the same. I'm not worried about the optics question that you shared before, participating in a committee of 35 people. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. Does that help? Okay.
Okay, so we want to talk about strategic directions and advocacy. We're all familiar with advocacy in bringing the voice in, what we're hearing, sharing the proper place, both board meetings, your superintendent, with in committee. That is important. We are the voice of the people, but we also want to take the work of the district out to the community. So I'm suggesting to you, and I did speak with your board president for this meeting, that I think we should have an ad hoc committee, and that means you are in and out. You're not a standing committee. Build an actual outreach program for the Board of Education for board members to participate in that specifies the key messages we're communicating about strategic actions, the vision of the district, what does excellent education look like, maybe some broad messages about the reality of our state dynamic, and etc. Just that overview of what is education could even help people understand how to engage with the board, the role of the board, how, etc. And then those target audiences that we want to reach. I know there are many, many forms of communication from this district inside to out, but people really respect when you meet them on their turf, right? Homeowners groups, chamber groups. We were involved parents when somebody came to us and shared with us what was on the district. And that's a pretty extensive list, and it can also be expanded into the notion of advocacy on behalf of the district, targeting legislators, the legislature, where your voice belongs at a federal level. This is our job. So I am suggesting to you that an ad hoc group would need. I'm happy to help you with this. Terry Caney is quite available, very familiar with your community and all the pockets of influence and the softer voices and places we need to go. So we reach out to them, and you take your message out to those people, hear from those people, and help them understand how to engage their voice in your school district. So I have an example from another district. This is around a particular issue, but they specified the audience that they needed to reach, who was the messenger. Ken Mintz would be going into that meeting, when he would be going, and then reporting back to the group on how that meeting went. Quite simply put, this work isn't done unless we build the plan and do it. We're very available. Shelley, if they call you, say, can you come on over and talk to the, the Moms Who Love the Library or the Kiwanis or the Chamber, of course you're going to go. This is a chance to bring in the student board representative as well, who can go and speak on behalf of what's going on in the schools. But I think this is a good time at San Ramon for us to actually build this plan and for have you, because I hear you saying let's bring those voices in. How many people participated? Did we reach them? And I think it's not just message out, but sending you out. So, and it's very humbling experience to sit before such a talented board and give assignment. But you're all looking at me with kind eyes. So I do think an ad hoc committee could just sit down and look at this and build it out. And I know Terry Caney would be very available to helping you execute that.
Well, and it's almost kind of an extension to what we've done with the strategic direction. We wanted to not like, okay, this is a district thing or a board thing or whatever. We're saying with all the inputs from our community as well as, just the school community, right? Kind of broad, because there are certain things, certain issues we can't handle as a school district. We need our community help. So I think that it makes sense to at least set a plan, and because it's a big plan. So I think another ad hoc committee would be useful.
And it gives you a place to this is a place where you're going to want to talk about legislation that you're studying, and when is a board going to take position on legislation or just not take position on legislation. But that could be studied in this committee too, with a recommendation to the board. That's ours to own. I know you're members of SRVUSD, and that's where we study legislation in the context of what's important to our broad community and the students we serve. So I think this is really just a healthy place for all your energy and your talent. And I'm proposing, John, that a separate ad hoc committee would be.
And I think too that what it does too is it gives us a strategy around communication, which I think as leaders, which I think would be extremely helpful in terms of rolling out the strategic plan. And we then can work together instead of being siloed, because again, that is kind of a little bit of my experience of, okay, I wanna do all of these things, but I don't know who else is doing it, and I don't know how to reach out to this person or this group or this, and then maybe that's something that someone else is already involved in. And so having that framework and structure and from a communication standpoint as a governing body, I think would go, it's even extends past advocacy. I think it really builds trust in the community, and it builds that understanding that has broken down over the last few years because of various reasons.
And it allows you to listen.
Yeah.
But listen. And as we were saying in a recent conversation, sir, listen not just to the messenger, but to the message, and listen beyond the words of what's at the heart of that. Like they were frightened, or and anger isn't an emotion. It's a reaction to something, right? It just, and all the positive that's out there and all the ways to engage people. So I think you're just a terrific group to do this. And I do agree, when it's then we're sort of afraid we're going to step on somebody else's turf or they're done. So
I wouldn't want to underplay all the work he's been doing since his arrival, like even through COVID and Zooming, about reaching out and getting the word out. But I really do believe that as a governing board, we've not been much more than reactive to requests for these kind of things, as opposed to being able to put together a project plan and strategy for getting the word out. I think particularly in terms of community at large, we do, we send a lot of communication to our school community and parents. But when you talk about the other 60 to 70% of our community that doesn't have kids in schools, but has an impact on some of the things we do, we need to do, I think, that much better job of reaching out to them. And we hear their voice, understand their interests and needs too.
Hear them, exactly. Yeah, thank you.
And if I could add a metaphor, when I got here a year ago, many members of our community thought that I needed to be there. And I'm trying to be very intentional about a shift. If any member of cabinet is there, I'm there, we're there, because we've built in a structure that I've told you about at our cabinet meetings, wherever anybody is out. We send that person to that space with a clear direction, and they come back and get insight, and then it informs our work to you. This plan could do the same thing. It doesn't have to be the president who is the spokesperson when you're talking about this kind of advocacy. Everyone knows who's gone out, and then through your board reports, it can come back. And then when I'm listening to your board reports, that which is mine to take, you know that I'm gleaning everything that you've learned in your work out there that is strategic and organized so that it informs the work that goes on. So I'm just letting you know that I'm working on it from a staff perspective. Our culture is used to something different, and I'm trying to gently and respectfully shift that, because again, it's not sustainable to be everywhere. But with 5 of you, there's a really strategic way to be even that much more present. I mean, you're very present people in the community, I know that, but even that much more present, and then it could actually have influence in a way that moves us forward. So
This is so exciting, and it's so welcome for me personally, because I've been struggling with how to engage the community and with all of the rules around social media and should I do this and I shouldn't do that, and it gets very confusing. And so I've basically stayed off of social media completely, but this would be another avenue that we could put a framework around, that we could all work together as a group to put out our message, because the community, as Ken said, the communication that's been put out by the district has been amazing, especially since the pandemic and since Dr. Malloy came on board. But I feel like us as a board, or us as individual board members, need to have a way to outreach to the community, and this would be a fantastic way to do it. So thank you for bringing that to us today.
Well, yeah, and it's, and you have this talent of Denise, Terry, and I know you hire, then they'll be there to help you with the materials you need. And Denise and Terry know your community so well, as do you. I think they'll be able to organize something that you'll just be able to just dive right in and feel great about that work. So I know it's social media. I understand. Thank you. Rachel, comments?
So, yeah, I just want to be mindful again. I know Rachel
Time?
has to go,
Yes.
and I want mindful for everyone else's time. So do you need the assignments? Yeah, of the
Yes.
two ad hoc
Yes.
committees?
So
Because I also have, public comment.
handbook. I see a hand.
Oh, it's Shelby. And then, yeah, I'm thinking one of the, newer, and
I'll go wherever you need.
that's great.
I'd like to do the communication.
Yeah, I'd really like to do the
Okay,
communication.
well, that worked out.
Thanks, Laura. And so you'll help with the handbook. Thank you. Okay, that concludes my question. But hey, it's been nice to be with you all very much. Thank you. Long morning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you. It's
and from
early.
my seat,
Yeah.
thank you. This is really helpful. Very, very helpful.
Well, I mean,
And
no
thank
offense,
you.
colleague Namita, but when we lecture on the Brown Act and then the meeting's over and we think, how do we get on the agenda? I don't know. It's like I had so many houses.
Thank you very much for your participation as well.
Oh, okay, so I do have, yes. So I do have a public comment for, Holland Authority Valley, but, and I know you submitted 4.1 and 5.0. So just to let you know, the 5.0 public comment, because this is a special meeting, it's not the public comment is related, right, to basically the 4.1. Yes, okay, so go ahead. Thank you.
Should I move it?
The authority to guide you. That wasn't explained. Are they retained by us as taxpayers? I mean, why do you have the authority to tell our board what to do? And these are the thoughts of the 3 hours I went through. If the agenda item and resolutions are driven by the staff, then the board of the trustees are sort of kidnapped to do what the staff wants. The public wants to, what the public wants then is completely irrelevant because the public has not been allowed to help shape what make the meeting agenda. Past agenda have been very sloppy, in my opinion. There was one example I recall. The agenda on the meeting was about an annual budget audit. The presenter was wrongly listed in the agenda, and the correct name of the presenter was not even properly mentioned. It was a physical meeting, but the accountant who was supposed to present the audit on the phone. So I just think that the agenda process really was very up so far. That it's actually a good idea for us to reflect on this. Public can also participate better because oftentimes we're at a loss because we don't really know what you're doing per what we're reading. And then the trustee Hurt's comment about agenda items don't always need to end in a resolution is greatly appreciated. Because I feel sometimes that you don't even really know what's going on, and then you all vote in a resolution like echo bugs. That really concerns me as a public. And you talked about calendar. I would like to know if you put something on the calendar, how far in advance do you have to revise, to add, or delete so us public can be aware? And the public initiation goes to the president. Do you mean the trustee president? So then if she's not allowed to our emails, then the public really has no way of initiating anything on the agenda. Addressing respect. Per the Brown Act, I don't think respect is required from the public to the trustee board. We are able to criticize you as long as I think we're conducting business in a civilized manner. Like I've been sitting there quietly, civilized for 3.5 hours. I feel the time you're and you only give me 3 minutes to tell you 3 hours of the things that I need to tell you. I don't really think you're very interested in the public at all. I would like to know how you spell the name. I kept hearing Carolyn, and then the lawyer name is Amita. I'm not sure I appreciate that kind of information. I would, as a public, I would like to know how do you spell their first and last name because they are public officials. And it's really difficult to respect you when you're elected by the district. For half of you, I don't even have a chance to elect. So you're not really a democratic board, just so you to me are like an autocratic board. You're imposing a lot of your political agenda on me because I cannot elect you. I cannot initiate the agenda. I have to keep taking what you do. Okay, I do have public comment, right? Related to this, right? No.
No, the public comment is actually 5.0. There is no comment on it. Yeah, she clicked it by accident.
Yeah, I just want to add to Helen's comment. This is because I know you had said that you weren't sure and it's really confusing and you might, you don't know what we're doing. And that's exactly this workshop. That's exactly, so we will let the public know exactly some of the that also questions that you have with our handbook, so that everyone, it's going to be public, so you know exactly the way that we are doing things. That's the basic purpose for this workshop. Okay, so I know that we have to close the meeting, so our workshop's adjourned for today. Thank you.